My name is David, and today I'm going to tell you about the night I stood on my apartment balcony, looking at the city lights below, convinced that my life was about to fall apart, and how God spoke words that would change everything about how I saw my future. Before we continue, if this story resonates with you, please subscribe to this channel and share it with someone who's struggling with fear about what's coming next. Leave a comment telling me what future situation is keeping you up at night. I read every single one, and I pray for each of you. I was 28 years old, standing on that balcony at 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep. Again, for the third night in a row. My mind was racing through every possible catastrophe that could happen in the coming months, spinning scenarios of disaster like a movie I couldn't turn off. The letter was sitting on my kitchen counter. I'd read it so many times the creases were starting to tear. Notice of lease non-renewal. You have 60 days to vacate the premises. 60 days. 2 months to find a new apartment in a city where rent had skyrocketed, where finding anything affordable felt impossible, where every listing got 100 applications within hours. But it wasn't just the apartment. It never is it? When one thing starts to crumble, your brain helpfully points out everything else that could collapse too. My job at Morrison & Associates, the marketing firm where I'd worked for 3 years, was unstable. They'd had 2 rounds of layoffs in the past 6 months. I wasn't in immediate danger. My performance reviews were good. My clients liked me. But I could feel the uncertainty in every meeting, see the worry in my co-workers' eyes, hear the whispers about budget cuts and restructuring. My relationship with Jessica was in that ambiguous space where neither of us knew what we were anymore. We'd been together for 1.5 years, and lately every conversation seemed to circle around the same unspoken question: where is this going? She wanted commitment, wanted to talk about moving in together, about marriage, about building a future, and I wanted those things too, in theory. But how could I commit to a future when I couldn't even secure a present? How could I ask her to build a life with me when I might be unemployed and homeless in 2 months? My student loans, $43,000 that I'd been paying down slowly, faithfully for 6 years, suddenly felt crushing. Every month, $600 disappeared from my account, money I desperately needed now for apartment hunting, for moving costs, for the security deposit on a new place if I could even find one. Standing on that balcony, looking at the city that had once felt full of possibility, I felt suffocated by the future, not the distant future. I wasn't worried about retirement or old age. I was terrified of the next 60 days, the next 6 months. The immediate future that was rushing toward me like a freight train, and I couldn't get off the tracks. What if I can't find an apartment I can afford? What if I have to move somewhere far from work and my commute becomes impossible? What if the company does another round of layoffs and I'm let go? What if I lose my job and can't pay my loans and destroy my credit? What if Jessica gets tired of waiting for me to have my life together and leaves? What if I end up 30 years old, single, unemployed, living with my parents again like I'm 22? The spiral was familiar. I'd been living in it for weeks, ever since that letter arrived. Every morning, I'd wake up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Every day at work, I'd check apartment listings obsessively, calculating and recalculating budgets, trying to figure out how to make the numbers work. Every evening, I'd avoid Jessica's calls because I didn't know what to say to her, didn't know how to explain that I was drowning, and couldn't reach out to grab her hand because I was too busy flailing. My parents didn't understand. When I'd called them about the apartment situation, my dad had said, "You'll figure it out, David. You always do." As if confidence was the same as capability. As if believing things would work out somehow made them work out. My friends meant well, but their advice felt useless. Just find a roommate. Look in different neighborhoods. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise, a chance for a fresh start. A blessing? A fresh start? I didn't want fresh. I wanted stable. I wanted secure. I wanted to stop feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. I gripped the balcony railing, the metal cold under my hands. The city stretched out before me, thousands of lit windows, each one a life being lived, a story unfolding. How many of those people were terrified like me? How many of them were standing at their own windows, paralyzed by fear of what was coming? I'd tried everything I knew to try. I'd made spreadsheets of every available apartment in my price range. I'd updated my resume just in case. I'd started picking up freelance projects on the side to build a financial cushion. I'd read articles about budgeting and watched YouTube videos about negotiating rent. I'd done all the practical things you're supposed to do when facing uncertainty, but none of it touched the fear. The spreadsheets didn't quiet the voice in my head that whispered about worst-case scenarios. The extra freelance money didn't ease the knot in my stomach. The preparation didn't prevent the panic. A part of me knew I was catastrophizing. That's what my college roommate Jake would have said. He was studying psychology and loved to diagnose everyone. You're catastrophizing, David. You're imagining the worst possible outcomes and treating them as inevitable. And he'd have been right. The rational part of my brain knew that not every disaster I imagined would actually happen. That I'd probably find an apartment, probably keep my job, probably figure things out somehow. But knowing you're being irrational doesn't make the fear go away. If anything, it adds another layer. Now you're not just afraid, you're afraid and ashamed of being afraid. You're telling yourself you shouldn't feel this way, which somehow makes you feel it more intensely. I'd grown up going to church. My family wasn't super religious, but we went most Sundays. I'd been in youth group. I'd even gone on a mission trip to Honduras in high school. I believed in God, in some general way. But my faith had always been abstract, theoretical. I prayed sometimes, usually quick prayers before meals or when I really needed something. But I'd never had what you'd call a relationship with God. He was more like a distant relative I acknowledged existed but didn't really know. Standing on that balcony at 2 a.m, desperate and exhausted and out of options, I did something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. I prayed, really prayed. Not a quick, God, please help me find an apartment prayer, but an honest, raw, desperate conversation with a God I wasn't even sure was listening. God, I said out loud, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if you're there. I don't know if you care about something as small as my apartment lease or my job or my relationship. I know there are people with real problems, disease, poverty, war. I know my problems probably seem trivial, but I'm drowning here. I'm so scared of what's coming. Every time I think about the future, I feel like I can't breathe. I've tried to handle this on my own, and I can't. I just can't. If you're real, if you actually care about me, I need you to show up. I need you to do something. Because I'm at the end of myself. I waited. I don't know what I expected. A voice from the clouds, a lightning bolt, some unmistakable sign that God had heard me. But there was just silence. The sound of traffic below, the hum of air conditioning units from neighboring apartments, a dog barking somewhere in the distance, the ordinary sounds of a city at night. I felt stupid, embarrassed, like I'd just poured out my heart to an empty sky. I turned to go back inside, to try once again to sleep, to face another day of fear and uncertainty, and then I felt it, not a voice, not words I could hear with my ears, but something deeper than sound, more fundamental than language, a knowing that dropped into my chest, into that place where fear had been coiling for weeks. A presence that felt like warmth spreading through cold water, and with that presence came words, not spoken, but received, understood in a way that bypassed my ears and my rational mind and went straight to the core of who I was. While you fear the future, I am already solving it. I froze, my hand on the balcony door, my breath caught in my throat. While you fear the future, I'm already solving it. I turned back to the city, tears suddenly blurring the lights. What did that mean? I looked at the same skyline, the same streets, the same city I'd been staring at moments ago. Nothing had changed externally, but internally, something had shifted. While I'd been lying awake catastrophizing about the apartment, about my job, about Jessica, about everything, God had already been working, not waiting for me to figure it out, not watching to see if I'd handle it correctly. Already working, already moving, already solving problems I hadn't even identified yet. The fear was still there. I could still feel it, coiled in my stomach, ready to spring back into full force. But for the first time in weeks, it wasn't the only thing I felt. There was something else now, something that felt almost like peace. No, not quite peace, more like space, room to breathe, a sense that I didn't have to carry the weight of the future alone. I went back inside, left the balcony door open so I could still see the city. I sat on my couch in the darkness, my apartment lit only by the glow from outside, and I thought about those words. While you fear the future, I am already solving it. What was God solving while I'd been panicking about my apartment? What doors was he opening while I'd been convinced they were all closing? What people was he positioning while I'd been certain I was alone in this? What circumstances was he arranging while I'd been frantically trying to control everything? I didn't have answers, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe I didn't need all the answers right now. Maybe my job wasn't to figure out every detail of the next 6 months. Maybe my job was just to do the next right thing and trust that while I was doing it, God was working on things I couldn't see. I pulled out my phone, 3:17 in the morning. I should try to sleep, but instead I opened my notes app and typed, "While you fear the future, I am already solving it." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I added, "This is what God told me tonight. I don't know what it means yet, but I'm choosing to believe it's true." I did sleep that night, finally. Not well, not deeply, but I slept. And when I woke up the next morning, the fear was still there. The apartment situation hadn't magically resolved. My job wasn't suddenly secure. Jessica and I still had unresolved issues. None of the practical problems had disappeared, but something had changed. I had changed. I'd encountered something bigger than my fear. Something that suggested there was more happening than what I could see, more at work than just my own desperate efforts to keep my life from falling apart. I got ready for work, made coffee, checked my email. Normal morning routine. But as I was about to leave, I saw that letter on the counter again. 60 days. Still terrifying. Still urgent. Still real. But now there was another voice in my head, quieter than the fear, but somehow stronger. While you fear the future, I am already solving it. I didn't know what the next 60 days would hold. I didn't know how things would work out, but I knew one thing I hadn't known yesterday. I wasn't facing it alone. God was already there, already working, already solving. And somehow, that was enough to get me through the door and into the day. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. Not fixed. The problems were all still there, waiting for me like unwelcome guests. But something had shifted in how I was carrying them. The weight hadn't disappeared, but it felt distributed differently, like someone had stepped in to help me carry the load. I made coffee and sat at my small kitchen table, the eviction letter still there where I'd left it. 60 days. 59 now, technically. The clock was ticking. But instead of immediately spiraling into panic, I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed, not a desperate, panicked prayer like last night, just a simple conversation. God, I still don't know how this is going to work out, but you said you're already solving it, so I'm going to try to trust that today. Help me see what you're doing. At work, I had a 10 o'clock meeting with my boss, Sharon. She'd scheduled it 3 days ago with no context, just need to talk about some things. For the past 3 days, I'd been convinced it was about layoffs, about my performance, about something terrible. I'd rehearsed defensive responses, prepared explanations, imagined worst-case scenarios. But sitting in the lobby waiting to be called up, I remembered the words from last night. While you fear the future, I am already solving it. What if this meeting wasn't what I feared? What if God was already working in this situation in ways I couldn't see? Sharon's assistant called me in. I walked into her office, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. David. Thanks for coming in, Sharon said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. She was in her late 40s, had been with the company for 12 years, and had a reputation for being direct but fair. I wanted to talk to you about something that's been developing. My heart rate increased. Here it comes. As you know, we've been restructuring, she continued, making some difficult decisions about staffing and focus areas, and one of the things that's become clear is that we need someone to take on a new role, account director for our digital clients. It's a step up from account manager, comes with a salary increase and more responsibility, and I'd like to offer it to you. I stared at her. I'm sorry, what? She smiled. I know this might be surprising, but David, you've consistently delivered excellent work. Your clients love you. You're creative, reliable, and you handle pressure well. This role would involve managing a team of 3 account managers, overseeing our entire digital portfolio, and working more directly with senior leadership. It's a significant opportunity. I don't know what to say. Say yes, she laughed, or at least say you'll think about it. I need an answer by next week, but I wanted to give you time to consider what this would mean for your career. We talked for another 20 minutes about the specifics. The salary increase was substantial, 20% more than I was currently making. The responsibilities were indeed bigger, but they were things I felt capable of handling. The position would make me more valuable to the company, more secure. When I left her office, I stood in the hallway for a moment, processing. I'd walked into that meeting convinced I was about to be fired. Instead, I'd been offered a promotion. While I'd been fearing the future, God had already been solving it. The salary increase changed everything about my apartment situation. With 20% more income, I could afford places I'd written off as too expensive. I could negotiate from a position of strength rather than desperation. The impossible math suddenly had solutions. I called Jessica during my lunch break. We'd been playing phone tag for days, both of us avoiding the difficult conversations we needed to have. Hey, she answered, her voice cautious. I was starting to think you were avoiding me. I was, I admitted. I'm sorry. Things have been really stressful, and I didn't know how to talk to you about it. David, that's exactly when you should talk to me. We're supposed to be partners, right? You're right. Can we have dinner tonight? I want to tell you everything, and I want to actually listen to what you need to tell me. We met at a Thai restaurant we both loved, a casual place where we'd had our third date almost 2 years ago. Jessica looked beautiful, but tired, like she'd been carrying her own weight for too long. I got offered a promotion today, I started. Her face lit up. David, that's amazing. Why do you look so conflicted about it? I'm not conflicted about the promotion. I'm conflicted about the fact that for the past 3 weeks I've been shutting you out because I was convinced everything was falling apart. My apartment, my job, my life, and I was too scared to let you see how scared I was. She reached across the table and took my hand. I knew something was wrong. I've been giving you space, but it's been hard. I kept wondering if you were pulling away from me specifically or just from everything. Everything. But that's not fair to you. You deserve someone who doesn't disappear when things get hard. I don't need perfect, David. I need honest. If you're struggling, tell me. Let me help. Let me be there for you. That's what relationships are supposed to be. I told her everything, about the eviction notice, about the weeks of panic, about standing on my balcony at 2 a.m, convinced my life was ending. And then I told her about the prayer, about the words I'd heard, about starting to believe that maybe God was working in ways I couldn't see. I didn't know you were dealing with all that alone, she said, tears in her eyes. I wish you'd told me sooner. I know. I'm sorry. I think I was afraid that if you saw how much of a mess I was, you'd realize you deserved better. David, I don't want better. I want you, the real you, mess and all. But I need you to let me in. I need you to trust me with the hard stuff, not just the easy stuff. We talked for 3 hours about what we both wanted from the relationship, about the fears we'd both been carrying, about what it would look like to actually build a life together instead of just dating indefinitely. I'm not ready to move in together yet, I said honestly, Not because I don't want to, but because I need to figure out my own living situation first. But I want you to know, I see a future with you. Marriage, kids, the whole thing. I'm not just killing time." She smiled, wiping away tears. "That's all I needed to know. That you see it too. That we're moving towards something, not just existing in limbo." That night, lying in bed, I thought about the day. 24 hours ago, I'd been standing on my balcony convinced I was losing everything. Now I had a promotion, a significantly better financial situation, and a relationship that felt stronger because we'd finally been honest with each other. While you fear the future, I am already solving it. God hadn't been waiting for me to figure things out. He'd already been working, positioning people, opening doors, arranging circumstances. The promotion wasn't a last-minute rescue. Sharon told me they'd been considering this move for weeks. The solutions had been in motion long before I knew I needed them. Over the next few days, I started apartment hunting with new eyes. Instead of desperately scrolling through listings at 3 a.m, I approached it methodically. I expanded my search area slightly. I reached out to a real estate agent a colleague had recommended. I looked at places I could actually afford with my new salary. And then something unexpected happened. I got a text from my college friend Marcus, who I hadn't talked to in maybe 6 months. "Hey man, random question. Are you still living in that apartment in Riverside? My cousin is moving to the city for work and is looking for a place. Wondering if you know of anything available." I called him back immediately. "Actually, my landlord just gave me notice that he's not renewing my lease. The apartment is available in 60 days. It's a great place, good location, reasonable rent. Would your cousin be interested?" "Are you serious? That's perfect. Let me connect you two." Within 2 days, I'd connected the landlord with Marcus's cousin. They worked out a direct transition. He'd take over the apartment, I'd be released from my lease early without penalty, and I'd have extra time to find my new place without the pressure of a hard deadline. "This is too convenient," I told Jessica over the phone. "This kind of thing doesn't just happen." "Maybe it does," she said. "Maybe this is what it looks like when God is already solving things. You just needed to be in a place where you could see it." I found a new apartment the following week. 1 bedroom, slightly smaller than my current place, but in a better neighborhood, closer to work. The rent was manageable with my new salary. The landlord was flexible, willing to work with my timeline. Everything fell into place with an ease that felt almost surreal after weeks of panic. The day I signed the lease on the new place, I sat in the leasing office and just felt grateful. Not relieved, though I was relieved, but deeply, profoundly grateful. Because I could see now that while I'd been spinning out in fear, God had been working. The promotion had been in development for weeks. Marcus's cousin had been planning his move for months. The timing had been orchestrated in ways I couldn't have planned or controlled. That Sunday, I did something I hadn't done since college. I went to church, not because I felt obligated, not out of habit or family pressure, but because I wanted to. Because something had changed in me that night on the balcony, and I wanted to understand it better. The church was called Cornerstone Community, about 10 minutes from my new apartment. It met in a renovated warehouse, had about 300 people, felt casual and welcoming. I slipped into a seat near the back, feeling both conspicuous and invisible. The worship music was contemporary, energetic. I didn't know the songs, but I listened, watching the people around me sing with hands raised, eyes closed, fully engaged. When was the last time I'd been that unself-conscious about anything? The pastor, a man probably in his early 50s named James, spoke about Exodus, the story of the Israelites trapped between the Egyptian army and the Red Sea. Impossible situation. No visible way forward. Complete panic. "And what does God tell Moses?" Pastor James asked. "Essentially, stand still and watch me work. Stop panicking. Stop trying to figure it out. Just stand there and watch what I'm going to do." He paused, looking out at the congregation. How many of you are facing a Red Sea moment right now, a situation that feels impossible? where you can't see any way forward and you're convinced it's all going to end in disaster. I felt like he was talking directly to me. Here's what I want you to understand. While you're panicking, God is already working. He's not scrambling to come up with a solution. He's not surprised by your circumstances. He's already several steps ahead, already arranging things you can't see, already preparing the path forward. Your job isn't to figure out how to part the Red Sea. Your job is to trust the one who's already got the solution in motion. After the service, I stood outside for a moment, not quite ready to leave. A guy about my age approached me. "First time here?" he asked. "Yeah, how'd you know?" He laughed. "I've been coming for 2 years. You get a sense for the new faces. I'm Ryan." "David, what'd you think?" "Honestly, I think that sermon was exactly what I needed to hear today." "Yeah, James has a way of doing that." "Hey, we have a young adults group that meets Wednesday nights if you're interested. Good community, good discussions. No pressure, just if you're looking to connect with people." I took his number, thanked him, and walked to my car. In the span of 2 weeks, my entire life had shifted. The promotion, the apartment situation resolving, the relationship with Jessica getting stronger, and now a potential community, a place to explore this faith that was becoming more than just theoretical. While you fear the future, I am already solving it. I was starting to understand what those words meant. Not that I'd never face difficulties, not that everything would magically work out without effort on my part, but that I wasn't navigating life alone, that there was someone already at work in my circumstances, already positioning pieces, already preparing solutions. The fear wasn't completely gone. I still had moments of panic, still caught myself catastrophizing about potential problems. But now there was another voice in the conversation. A reminder that while I worried about what might happen, God was already there, already working, already solving, and that made all the difference. 3 weeks had passed since that night on the balcony, 3 weeks of watching my life reorganize itself in ways I couldn't have orchestrated, even if I'd tried. The promotion was official. The new apartment lease was signed, and I was scheduled to move in 2 weeks. Everything that had felt impossible was now not just possible, but actually happening. But here's what nobody tells you about answered prayers and divine intervention. Solving one set of problems often reveals another layer underneath. With the immediate crisis handled, my brain helpfully pointed out all the new things I could worry about. The new role at work started in 1 week. Account director, managing 3 people. Bigger clients, bigger budgets, bigger expectations. What if I wasn't ready? What if I couldn't handle the increased responsibility? What if the promotion was a mistake and I failed spectacularly? Moving into a new apartment meant setting up utilities, buying furniture I didn't have, coordinating with movers, changing my address everywhere, adapting to a new neighborhood. 1,000 small details that my anxiety was happy to catastrophize into major disasters. And with Jessica, things were better, more honest, more connected. But that honesty had opened up conversations about the future that were both exciting and terrifying. She'd started talking more explicitly about timelines, about when we might get engaged, about what our life together might look like. And every time she did, I felt that familiar knot of fear. What if I couldn't give her what she needed? What if I failed as a husband the way I sometimes felt I was failing as a boyfriend? I was learning that faith wasn't a one-time decision. It was a choice you made over and over, every time fear showed up with its helpful suggestions about everything that could go wrong. Wednesday evening, I went to the young adults group at Cornerstone Community. Ryan had texted me the details, and despite my tendency to avoid new social situations when stressed, I went. Partly because I was trying to build community, but mostly because I was learning that isolation made everything worse. The group met in a side room at the church, about 20 people, mostly late 20s to mid-30s, sitting in a circle of mismatched chairs. Ryan waved me over to an empty seat next to him. "Glad you came," he said. "We're doing a study on the book of Joshua. Tonight's topic is crossing the Jordan River." A woman named Elena was facilitating. She was probably early 30s, spoke with an easy confidence that suggested she'd done this many times before. "So the Israelites have been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, she said. Moses has died, Joshua is now the leader, and God tells them it's time to cross the Jordan River into the Promised Land. But there's a problem. It's flood season. The river is at its highest, most dangerous level. Crossing seems impossible." She read from Joshua chapter 3. "As soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap." Notice the order of operations here, Elena continued. God doesn't part the water first and then tell them to cross. He tells them to step into the river, and then he'll part it. They have to move forward into the scary thing before they see how it's going to work out. A guy across the circle raised his hand. But didn't God just demonstrate his power with the Red Sea? Why do they need another water-parting miracle? Different generation, Elena said. Most of the people who experienced the Red Sea have died. This is a new generation that needs to learn to trust God themselves. And maybe that's always how it works. We can hear about other people's miracles, but we need our own experiences to really build faith. I thought about my balcony moment. My own Red Sea, in a sense, my own moment of God meeting me in impossibility. After the formal teaching, we broke into smaller discussion groups. I ended up with Ryan, a woman named Tasha, and a guy named Kevin, who looked like he'd just come from the gym. "So what's your story?" Tasha asked me directly. "What brings you to the group?" I hesitated. I'd spent years keeping my struggles private, presenting a competent face to the world. But something about the openness in this space made me want to be honest. "I had a pretty intense couple of months," I said. "Got an eviction notice, thought I was going to lose my job, was convinced my life was falling apart, hit rock bottom, and ended up having this experience where I felt like God spoke to me, told me that while I was fearing the future, he was already solving it. And then things started changing. Got promoted, found a new apartment. Everything kind of fell into place in ways I can't explain." "That's incredible," Kevin said. "But why do you look stressed if everything's working out?" I laughed. "Because now I'm worried about different things. The new job, the move, my relationship. My brain apparently needs something to be anxious about, or it doesn't know what to do with itself." "I get that," Tasha said. "I'm a chronic worrier too. I've learned that worry is basically my brain's way of trying to control the future. Like if I think through every possible disaster, somehow I can prevent them, or at least be prepared." "But you can't control the future," Ryan added. "You can prepare, you can plan, you can work hard, but ultimately there's so much that's outside your control. That's where faith comes in, trusting that God's got the things you can't control." We talked for another 30 minutes. About fear, about faith, about the tension between doing our part and trusting God's part. It was the most honest conversation I'd had in months with people who weren't Jessica. As the group was ending, Elena came over to me. "David, right? Ryan mentioned you were new. How'd you like it?" "Really good, actually. This is different from what I expected church to be." She smiled. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. More judgmental, more about having your life perfectly together before you're allowed to participate." "Yeah, that's not us. We're all just trying to figure out how to follow Jesus in the mess of real life." "Speaking of which, you mentioned you're starting a new job soon." "Yeah, next week. Promotion to account director." "Congratulations." "And terrifying." I laughed. "Very. I keep thinking about all the ways I could fail." "Can I tell you something that helped me when I stepped into leadership?" Elena said. "You're not supposed to have it all figured out before you start. The growth happens in the doing, not in the preparing. God often calls us to things we're not quite ready for, because that's how he grows us." That thought stuck with me as I drove home. Maybe I wasn't supposed to feel completely confident before starting the new role. Maybe the uncertainty was part of the process. The following Monday, I started as account director. Sharon had set up meetings with each of the 3 account managers who would now report to me. Megan, who was close to my age and had been with the company for 4 years, James, who was younger and newer but sharp and eager, and Patricia, who'd been there longer than anyone and had forgotten more about client management than I'd ever learned. My first one-on-one was with Patricia, which felt intimidating. She'd been an account manager when I was hired 3 years ago. Now I was technically her boss. "So," she said, settling into the chair in my new office, still not quite feeling like my office. "How are you feeling about all this?" "Honestly? Terrified. You've been doing this longer than I have. It feels weird that I'm now supposed to be managing you." She laughed. "David, do you know why I'm okay with this? Because you just admitted you're terrified. The worst managers are the ones who pretend they know everything and won't admit when they don't. If you can stay humble and honest, we'll work great together." My meetings with Megan and James went similarly well. They both seemed relieved to have someone leading the team, and neither of them seemed resentful about my promotion. By the end of the first day, I realized that most of my fears about this role had been about hypothetical problems that hadn't materialized. That weekend was moving day. Jessica came over early to help, along with my friend Jake and his girlfriend. We'd rented a truck, hired 2 movers for the heavy furniture, and planned to be done by evening. "I still can't believe this is the apartment you were panicking about losing a month ago," Jake said as we carried boxes down to the truck. "And now you're moving into a better place with the promotion funding it." "Yeah, it's surreal. A month ago I was convinced everything was falling apart." "What changed?" I thought about how to answer. "I stopped trying to control everything. I started trusting that maybe someone bigger than me was working on my problems." Jake raised an eyebrow. He knew my ambivalent history with faith. "David Chen believer, never thought I'd see the day." "Neither did I. But something happened that I can't really explain away, and things have worked out in ways I couldn't have orchestrated." By evening, we'd moved everything into the new apartment. It was chaos, boxes everywhere, furniture in wrong places, half of my possessions still packed. But it was mine, a fresh start in a space that represented God's provision in tangible form. Jessica and I ordered pizza and sat on my couch. One of the few pieces of furniture we'd actually assembled, surrounded by boxes. "I'm proud of you," she said. "For what?" "Moving boxes. For facing your fears. For getting help. For letting people in. For trusting. A month ago, you were shutting me out, convinced you had to handle everything alone. Now look at you. You let me help you move. You're going to church. You're in a small group. You're starting a new job. You're different." "I had to hit bottom first," I admitted. "I had to get to the point where I couldn't fix things myself. That's when God showed up. Maybe that's always how it works. Maybe we have to stop trying to be our own savior before we can see the real savior." The next day, I woke up in my new apartment, sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, the sounds of a different neighborhood, everything strange and new and slightly disorienting. I made coffee in my new kitchen, found my Bible in one of the boxes, a Bible I'd gotten as a teenager and barely touched in a decade. I flipped through it randomly, not sure what I was looking for, until I landed on a passage in Philippians. "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Do not be anxious about anything. Easy to say, harder to live, but I was learning. Learning that anxiety was a signal that I was trying to carry weight I was never meant to carry alone. Learning that prayer wasn't just emergency measures when life fell apart, but ongoing conversation with someone who was already working on my behalf. I started my first full week as account director. The work was challenging but manageable. My team was supportive. The clients I'd been nervous about meeting actually appreciated my approach. Nothing went catastrophically wrong. All the disasters I'd imagined didn't happen. Wednesday evening, I went back to the young adults group. This time, I knew people's names, felt less like an outsider. Ryan introduced me to a few others I hadn't met the week before. We studied the next chapter of Joshua, the Battle of Jericho, where God gave them victory in completely unconventional ways. God's solutions often don't look like what we'd plan, Elena said. He told them to march around the city and blow trumpets. Not exactly standard military strategy, but it worked because they trusted his way, instead of insisting on their own. After the group, several of us went to a nearby coffee shop. Ryan, Elena, Tasha, Kevin, and a couple of others. We talked about normal things, work, relationships, TV shows we were watching, but underneath the casual conversation was something else: community. People who knew struggle, who were honest about fear, who were learning to trust God together. "Can I ask you guys something?" I said. "How do you handle it when new fears show up? Like, God help me with my apartment and job situation. But now I'm worried about different things. Does it ever stop?" "Nope," Tasha said cheerfully. "Sorry to disappoint you. You just get better at recognizing the pattern and choosing faith faster. Think of it like building muscle," Kevin added. "The first time you lift weights, it's really hard, but you keep doing it, and it gets easier, not because the weight gets lighter, but because you get stronger. Same with faith. The fears don't necessarily get smaller, but your ability to trust God through them gets bigger." "So, what do I do with the fear in the meantime?" I asked. "You do what you just did," Elena said. "You bring it to community. You pray. You remember what God's already done. You take the next step even when you're scared. And you trust that while you're fearing whatever's coming next, God is already solving it." Those words again. The words that had become my anchor in the past month. "While you fear the future, I am already solving it." I was learning that those words weren't just for crisis moments. They were for every day, every decision, every new challenge. God wasn't just solving the big catastrophes. He was already at work in every small uncertainty, every transition, every fear. As I drove home that night, I thought about how much had changed in 1 month. Not just externally, the job, the apartment, the relationship, but internally. I was different, less controlled by fear, more open to trust, more willing to be vulnerable, more aware that I wasn't navigating life alone. The journey wasn't over. There would be new challenges, new fears, new opportunities to choose faith over control, but I wasn't facing them the way I'd faced them before. Because now I knew something I hadn't known a month ago. While I feared the future, God was already there, already working, already solving. And that changed everything. 2 months had passed since that night on the balcony. 2 months of learning what it meant to live with faith instead of just fear. The new role was challenging but rewarding. The apartment had become home. Jessica and I were stronger than we'd ever been. And I was becoming part of a community at Cornerstone that was teaching me what authentic faith looked like. But life has a way of testing whether the lessons you've learned are just theoretical or if they've actually taken root in your soul. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a client meeting when my phone buzzed with a call from my mum. I ignored it. She knew I was working. She'd leave a voicemail if it was important. But then she called again, immediately, and then a third time. I excused myself from the meeting and called her back. "David, it's your father." Her voice was shaking. "He's in the hospital. He had a heart attack this morning. They're taking him into surgery." The world tilted sideways. My dad was only 56, relatively healthy, no history of heart problems. This wasn't supposed to happen. "How bad is it?" "They're calling it a major cardiac event. The surgery should take a few hours." "David, I'm scared. I'm coming home. I'll get a flight today. Mom, he's going to be okay." I said those words with a confidence I absolutely didn't feel. After I hung up, I stood in the hallway outside the conference room trying to process. My dad, surgery, major cardiac event. All the faith I'd been building for 2 months suddenly felt flimsy, theoretical. God had helped with my apartment and my job. But this was different. This was life and death. This was my father. I went back into the conference room, apologized to the client, explained there was a family emergency. Sharon told me to take whatever time I needed. Within 2 hours, I was on a flight to Detroit, where my parents lived. Jessica met me at my apartment to help me pack. I can come with you, she offered. No, you have that big presentation Thursday. I'll be okay. David, you don't have to do this alone. I know. But I need to be there for my mom right now, and I can't be worried about you missing important work commitments. The flight felt endless. I tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. All I could think was, God, you can't take my dad. Not now. Not like this. Please. My mom picked me up from the airport. She looked exhausted, terrified, trying to hold herself together. They finished the surgery an hour ago. He's in ICU. They said the next 24 hours are critical. At the hospital, we sat in the ICU waiting room with my aunt and uncle. The surgeon came out to brief us. They'd done a triple bypass. The blockages were severe. My dad was lucky he'd made it to the hospital when he did. He was stable for now, but they were monitoring him closely. Can I see him? Brief visits, 10 minutes at a time. He's sedated, won't be responsive yet. But you can go in. I walked into the ICU room and saw my dad, my strong, capable, always in control father, hooked up to machines, tubes everywhere, looking small and vulnerable in the hospital bed. I pulled up a chair and took his hand. Hey, Dad, it's David. I'm here. You're going to be okay. You have to be okay. I sat there for my 10 minutes, watching the monitors, listening to the rhythmic beeping, trying to reconcile this fragile version of my father with the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd helped me move into my first apartment, who'd given me terrible but well-meaning advice about career and relationships. That night, I stayed at my parents' house, the house I'd grown up in, now feeling empty and wrong without my dad there. My mom and I sat at the kitchen table, neither of us able to sleep. I keep thinking about all the things I should have said to him, she said. All the times I was annoyed about stupid things. What if I don't get another chance? Mom, don't think like that. He's going to pull through. But I didn't know that. And the uncertainty was terrifying in a way that apartment problems and job stress had never been. This wasn't something I could solve with a promotion or a lease. This was beyond my control in the most fundamental way. I went to my old bedroom and tried to pray. God, I know I just started trusting you a few months ago. I know I'm new at this faith thing, but I need you to show up now. Please don't take my dad. Please let him be okay. And then, in the silence, I heard it again. Not audibly, but in that same deep place where I'd heard it on the balcony. While you fear the future, I am already solving it. But this time it didn't bring comfort. This time it felt like a platitude. Because what if the solution wasn't healing? What if God's plan didn't include my dad surviving? What if the future I was fearing actually came to pass? Over the next 3 days, I lived in that hospital. My dad was moved from ICU to a regular cardiac floor, which was good news. He woke up, was able to talk a little, recognized us. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but I couldn't shake the fear. Every time a doctor came in, I braced for bad news. Every time a monitor beeped differently, I panicked. I was discovering that faith wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to trust, despite the fear. Jessica called me every night. How are you holding up? I don't know. I keep trying to have faith, but I'm so scared. Faith doesn't mean you're not scared, David. It means you trust God, even when you're terrified. On the 4th day, I needed to get out of the hospital for a bit. I drove to a park near my parents' house, sat on a bench, and just let myself feel everything I'd been trying to hold back. The fear, the anger, the bargaining, the desperate need for control. God, I don't understand this. You told me you were solving the future. You helped with my apartment and my job. Why did you let this happen to my dad? What am I supposed to do with this? I didn't hear an answer. Just the sound of wind through trees, cars passing on the nearby road, kids playing on a distant playground, the ordinary sounds of life continuing while mine felt suspended. My phone rang. My mum. David, you need to come back to the hospital. Your dad's asking for you. I drove back, my heart pounding. What if this was it? What if he was asking for me to say goodbye? But when I got to the room, my dad was sitting up in bed, looking tired but alert. More like himself than I'd seen since the surgery. Hey, son, your mom said you've been here the whole time. Of course. Where else would I be? You have work, a life. You don't need to put everything on hold for me. Dad, you had a heart attack. I'm not worried about work right now. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "This whole thing has made me think about a lot, about how I've spent my time, about what matters. I've been so focused on career, on providing, on being successful. But lying in that ICU, all I could think about was whether I'd been a good father, whether I'd told you and your mom I loved you enough, whether I'd lived a life that mattered. Dad, you've been a great father. I haven't always shown it. I've been hard on you sometimes, too focused on achievement, not enough on just being present. If I get through this, when you get through this, when I get through this," he corrected himself, "I'm going to do some things differently. I'm going to make sure you know how proud I am of you, not just when you get promoted or accomplish something, just because you're my son." We talked for another hour, about things we'd never really talked about before, about fear and faith and what it means to live well, about second chances and not taking time for granted. As I left his room, I realized something. God wasn't solving this situation the way I demanded. My dad hadn't been miraculously healed. He still had months of recovery ahead, but God was working in it, bringing me home to be with my family, creating space for conversations that needed to happen, teaching both my dad and me about what really mattered. Maybe that was what, "While you fear the future, I am already solving it," really meant. Not that God prevented every hard thing, but that he was working in the hard things, using them for purposes we couldn't see in the moment. On day 7, the doctors cleared my dad to go home. He'd need cardiac rehab, medication, lifestyle changes. But he was alive, he was going to make it. I stayed another 3 days to help get him settled, to make sure my mom wasn't overwhelmed, to coordinate follow-up appointments. And in those days, I saw my parents' relationship in a new light. The way they'd faced this crisis together, the care they showed each other, the depth of love that had sustained them through 35 years of marriage. Jessica video called me one evening. "When are you coming back?" "In a couple days. My dad's doing better. I think my mom can handle things now." "David, I've been thinking about us, about the future, and I know the timing might be weird, but when you get back, I want to talk about getting engaged, for real. Not just theoretical someday conversations, actual timeline conversations." My first instinct was panic. We'd been together less than 2 years. I was just settling into the new job. Was I ready for this? But then I thought about my dad, lying in that hospital bed, talking about regrets and time wasted and things that mattered. And I thought about Jessica, who'd been patient with my fears, who'd supported me through my crisis, who was ready to build a life together. "Yeah," I said, "let's talk about it, because I don't want to wait until everything's perfect, or until I feel completely ready. I want to build a life with you." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Really? Really? My dad almost died this week. It taught me that waiting for the perfect time is just another form of fear, and I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions." When I got back to the city, Jessica picked me up from the airport. We drove to her apartment, sat on her couch, and had the most honest conversation we'd ever had about what we wanted. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Marriage is permanent. What if I'm not good at it? What if I disappoint you? You probably will disappoint me sometimes. And I'll disappoint you. That's not a reason not to get married, it's just reality. But David, I'd rather face the hard stuff together than face easy stuff apart." We decided on a timeline. 6 months to get engaged, a year after that to plan the wedding. It felt terrifying and right in equal measure. That Sunday, I went to Cornerstone. Pastor James was speaking about the story of Job, a man who lost everything and struggled to understand why God allowed suffering. "Job's friends tried to explain his suffering," Pastor James said. "They tried to make sense of it, to fit it into their theology. But God's response to Job wasn't explanation. It was presence. God showed up. And sometimes that's the answer. Not understanding why, but knowing we're not alone in it." After the service, I found Ryan. "Can I ask you something? How do you keep having faith when God doesn't answer prayers the way you want? What happened?" I told him about my dad, about the fear, about feeling like my faith wasn't strong enough to handle real crisis. David, faith isn't about never being scared. It's about where you go with the fear. You went to your family. You stayed present. You had honest conversations with God, even when you were angry. That's faith. Not pretending everything's fine, but trusting God's presence even when things aren't fine. Over the next few weeks, I settled back into normal life, but I was different. The crisis with my dad had stripped away some of my illusions about control. I couldn't prevent every disaster. I couldn't guarantee outcomes. I couldn't make the future safe and certain, but I could trust. I could show up. I could love people well. I could do the next right thing and believe that God was working even in the uncertainty. While you fear the future, I am already solving it. I was learning that solving didn't always mean removing the problem. Sometimes it meant providing strength to face the problem. Sometimes it meant using the crisis to teach something essential. Sometimes it meant showing up in the midst of fear and reminding you that you weren't alone. My dad recovered slowly but steadily. Jessica and I started looking at rings. Work continued with its challenges and victories. Life moved forward, messy and uncertain, and full of moments that required choosing faith over fear. And in all of it, I was learning what it meant to live with open hands, not controlling, not demanding, not insisting on my preferred outcomes, just trusting that the one who'd met me on a balcony 2 months ago was still there, still working, still solving, even when I couldn't see how. Especially when I couldn't see how. 4 months after the balcony moment, 4 months of learning that faith wasn't a destination, but a daily practice. My dad was recovering well, doing cardiac rehab 3 times a week, eating better, moving more, approaching life with a perspective shift that had surprised all of us. Jessica and I were planning an engagement. We'd decided on the timeline, and I'd started looking at rings with a terrifying and exhilarating mix of emotions. Work had settled into a rhythm. I was finding my footing as account director, learning that leadership was less about having all the answers and more about asking the right questions and empowering my team. Megan, James, and Patricia were thriving, and several of our clients had specifically mentioned how much they appreciated the team's approach. But here's what I was discovering. Growth doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in the stretch. And God was about to stretch me in ways I didn't see coming. It started with a meeting Sharon called on a Thursday afternoon. She asked me and 2 other senior leaders to join her in the conference room. Unusual, but not alarming, until we sat down and saw the expression on her face. "I wanted you 3 to hear this from me before the company-wide announcement tomorrow," she said. "Morrison & Associates is being acquired by Sterling Global. It's been in negotiation for 3 months, and the deal just closed this morning." I felt my stomach drop. Acquisition, that word that had haunted my nightmares during the layoff, scares months ago. Acquisitions meant restructuring, redundancies, job eliminations. "What does this mean for our team?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Honestly, I don't know yet. Sterling will be conducting a comprehensive review over the next 60 days. They've assured us they're acquiring us for our talent and client relationships, not to gut the company. But there will be changes. There always are." After the meeting, I sat in my office, the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. I'd just gotten stable, just gotten comfortable, just started feeling secure. And now everything was uncertain again. I called Jessica. "Can you meet me for dinner? I need to talk." At the restaurant, I told her about the acquisition. "So we're back to the job security being questionable," she said. "Yeah, and I know the timing is terrible. We're planning to get engaged. You're looking at leaving your job to start your own graphic design business, and now my income might disappear. David, do you want to postpone? The engagement, I mean?" "No, I don't know. Maybe. I'm just scared that I'm going to let you down. That you're going to commit to a future with me and I'm not going to be able to provide what you need." She reached across the table and took my hand. "Can I tell you what I need? I need a partner who's honest about his fears, who doesn't hide when things get hard, who trusts that we can figure things out together. I don't need you to guarantee perfect stability. I need you to show up authentically. Even if I lose my job, even then, we'll figure it out. But David, you've been through this before. Remember the apartment, the job scare, all of it? And remember what happened? God was already solving it. Exactly. So maybe instead of spiraling into fear, we trust that He's already working on this too. That night, I went to the Wednesday Young Adults group at Cornerstone. We were studying the book of Daniel, and tonight's passage was about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being thrown into the fiery furnace for refusing to worship the king's idol. Elena read the passage where they tell the king, "If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. But even if He does not, we want you to know that we will not serve your gods." She stopped and looked at the group. Even if He does not, that's the faith statement right there. Not God will definitely rescue us from the fire, but God can rescue us, and even if He doesn't, we still trust Him. Ryan spoke up. That's terrifying, though. To trust God even when the outcome might not be what you want. It is terrifying, Elena agreed, but that's what real faith looks like. Not demanding that God gives us our preferred result, but trusting His presence and His character regardless of the result. After the group, I stayed behind to talk with Elena. I'm facing a situation where I might lose my job again, and I thought I'd learn to trust God with this stuff, but the fear is back and I don't know how to handle it. Tell me what happened last time you faced job uncertainty. I told her about the eviction notice, the spiral of fear, the balcony moment, the promotion that came out of nowhere. So God showed up, she said. He provided. He solved things in ways you couldn't have orchestrated. Right, but what if this time is different? What if this time the answer is that I do lose my job? How do I trust God then? By remembering that His presence matters more than the outcome. David, God didn't help you last time just to prove He could. He helped you so you'd learn to trust Him. And now He's giving you another opportunity to practice that trust in a new situation. But what if I'm about to propose to Jessica and then I lose my job right after? That's terrible timing. Or maybe it's perfect timing. Maybe God is teaching you that marriage isn't about having perfect circumstances. It's about committing to walk through whatever comes, together, with Him. Over the next few weeks, the uncertainty at work intensified. Sterling Global sent in their assessment team. They had meetings with every department, every leader. They reviewed client relationships, financial performance, operational efficiency. The whole company was on edge, waiting to see what changes would come. Meanwhile, I'd found the ring. A simple but elegant design that felt like Jessica. Classic, beautiful, understated. I'd been working with a jeweler to get it sized, planning how I'd propose, trying to figure out the right moment. But the fear kept whispering, what if you propose and then lose your job? What if she says yes, and then you can't give her the life she deserves? What if you're making a huge mistake? One evening, I was at my apartment, the ring box hidden in my sock drawer, staring at my laptop where I'd been updating my resume just in case. My phone rang. Pastor James from Cornerstone. David, this might be out of the blue, but I felt like I should call you. Elena mentioned you're going through some uncertainty at work. Yeah, company got acquired. Not sure what's going to happen. I wanted to tell you about something. We're starting a new ministry at the church. A career transition support group for people who are between jobs, changing careers, or dealing with workplace uncertainty. And I thought of you. You want me to join the group? Actually, I want you to help lead it with Ryan. He's been through several job losses and career pivots, and you've got recent experience with God meeting you in the midst of job fear. I think your story could help a lot of people. Pastor James, I might be joining that group as a participant soon. I don't know if I'm qualified to lead it. David, the best leaders are the ones who are in the midst of the struggle, not the ones who've figured it all out. Think about it, pray about it, let me know. I did pray about it, and the more I prayed, the more I felt this strange pull towards saying yes. Not because I had answers, but because I'd experienced God's faithfulness in fear. And maybe that experience was meant to be shared. A week later, Sterling Global announced their restructuring plan. My entire team was safe. In fact, the digital division was being expanded. They were bringing in more clients, more resources, more opportunities. I wasn't losing my job. I was getting an even stronger platform. But here's what struck me. Even before I knew the outcome, I'd said yes to leading the Career Transitions Group. Even in my uncertainty, God was using my fear to position me to help others with theirs. While you fear the future, I am already solving it. The solution wasn't just about my job security. It was about what God was building in me through the uncertainty. It was about teaching me to say yes even when I was scared. It was about showing me that my struggles had purpose beyond just my own growth. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday evening, I took Jessica to the park where we'd had our first date. It was autumn now, leaves changing colors, air crisp and cool. I'd told her I wanted to celebrate the good news about work, and she'd had no idea what I was actually planning. We walked along the path we'd walked almost 2 years ago, talking about work, about my dad's continued recovery, about her plans for her design business. And then I led her to the bench where we'd sat that first evening, where I'd been too nervous to hold her hand, where we'd talked for 3 hours about everything and nothing. "Jessica, do you remember sitting here that first night?" I asked. "Of course. You were so nervous. You kept fidgeting with your keys. I was terrified. I thought you were way out of my league. I couldn't believe you'd agreed to go out with me." She laughed. "I was nervous too. I kept thinking you'd realize halfway through the date that I was boring and make an excuse to leave. I want to tell you something. 2 years ago, I was trying so hard to be impressive, to seem like I had my life together, to convince you I was worth dating. And I think I've spent most of our relationship doing some version of that, trying to prove I'm worthy of you. David, let me finish. This year I hit rock bottom. I was terrified about losing my apartment, my job, everything, and I finally stopped pretending. I stopped trying to control everything. I stopped trying to be perfect. And when I did that, I found God, really found Him. And I found the real version of myself, the version that's scared sometimes, that doesn't have all the answers, that needs help. I got down on one knee, pulling out the ring box. And that version of me loves you more than the trying to be perfect version ever could. Because this version knows that I don't have to be perfect. I just have to show up honestly and trust that we can build something beautiful together, even when things are uncertain, even when I'm scared, even when life doesn't go according to plan. "Jessica, will you marry me?" She was crying, nodding, saying yes before I'd even finished asking. I slid the ring onto her finger, stood up, and she threw her arms around me. "I love you," she said. "The real, imperfect, scared sometimes, learning to trust God version of you. That's the person I want to marry." We sat on that bench for a long time, her head on my shoulder, my arm around her, both of us processing the fact that we'd just committed to a future together, a future we couldn't fully control or predict. A future that would inevitably include challenges and uncertainties and moments of fear, but also a future where we wouldn't face those things alone, where we'd have each other, and where we'd both learned that while we feared what was coming, God was already there, already working, already solving. "What are you thinking?" Jessica asked. "I'm thinking that 4 months ago I was standing on my balcony, convinced my life was falling apart. And God told me that while I was fearing the future, He was already solving it, and He was. But the solution wasn't just fixing my problems. It was teaching me to trust. It was positioning me to help others. It was bringing me to this moment with you, ready to build a life together. Do you still get scared about the future? All the time. But now I know I'm not facing it alone. I have you. I have God. I have a community that's taught me what faith actually looks like. And I'm learning that the goal isn't to eliminate fear, it's to trust something bigger than the fear. The first session of the Career Transitions Group was the following Tuesday. 12 people showed up, some unemployed, some unhappily employed, some in career limbo. Ryan and I shared our stories. I told them about the eviction notice, the job fears, the balcony moment, the words God had spoken. I can't promise that God is going to solve your situation the same way He solved mine, I told them, but I can promise that while you're fearing what's coming next, He's already there. He's already working, and His presence is more important than any outcome. One man, probably in his 50s, raised his hand. I've been out of work for 7 months. I've applied to over 200 jobs. How am I supposed to believe God is solving anything when nothing is changing? I don't know, I admitted. I can't explain why your timing is different from mine, but I can tell you that God hasn't abandoned you, that your worth isn't determined by your employment status, and that sometimes the solution God is working on is bigger than just getting you another job. Sometimes He's preparing you for something you can't see yet. And after the meeting, several people came up to thank us for creating the space, to say they'd felt alone in their struggle, to share pieces of their stories. As I drove home that night, engaged to the woman I loved, secure in my job, leading a ministry that was helping people who were where I'd been just months ago, I thought about the journey, from the balcony to the bench, from fear to faith, from isolation to community, from trying to control everything to learning to trust. While you fear the future, I am already solving it. God had been solving things all along, not just the practical problems, but the deeper issues, my need for control, my tendency to hide when scared, my belief that I had to be perfect to be loved, my isolation from community and from Him. The future was still uncertain in many ways. Jessica and I would face challenges in marriage. Work would have its difficulties. Life would bring surprises and struggles. But I knew now that I wasn't facing any of it alone, and that made all the difference. 6 months had passed since the balcony. Half a year of transformation that sometimes felt like a lifetime and sometimes felt like yesterday. Jessica and I were engaged, planning a wedding for the following spring. My dad had fully recovered and was living with a new appreciation for each day. Work was thriving under the Sterling Global acquisition, and the career transitions group at church had grown to 25 regular attendees. But if there's one thing I'd learned in these 6 months, it's that growth happens in layers. Just when you think you've learned a lesson, life presents it again at a deeper level, asking, "But do you really believe this?" The wedding planning had started simply enough. Jessica wanted something intimate, meaningful, not extravagant. We'd set a budget that felt responsible, started looking at venues, made preliminary plans, but then the complications began multiplying. Jessica's mom wanted to invite extended family we'd never planned for. My parents, grateful I was settling down, kept offering to pay for things we didn't need, but they thought would be nice. The church calendar was more full than we expected, limiting our date options. Venues that looked perfect in photos had issues when we visited in person. Every vendor seemed to cost more than the internet had led us to believe. And underneath all the logistics was a deeper current of fear. Marriage itself, the permanence of it, the commitment to build a life with someone when you couldn't guarantee you'd always have your act together. The vulnerability of saying, in front of everyone you knew, that you were choosing this person for the rest of your life. One evening, Jessica and I had our first real fight about the wedding. It started over something small, whether to have a DJ or a band, but quickly escalated into bigger questions about budget, about priorities, about whose vision for the day mattered more. "I feel like you're not even engaged in this process," Jessica said, frustration evident in her voice. "I'm trying to plan our wedding, and you're just agreeing to everything without actually caring." "I do care. I just don't care about whether we have a DJ or a band. I care about marrying you. The rest is details. But the details matter, David. They're how we express what we value, how we welcome our families, how we mark this moment in our lives. Your indifference about the details feels like indifference about the marriage itself. That's not fair. I'm not indifferent about marrying you. I'm just overwhelmed by all the decisions and opinions and expectations." We went around in circles for an hour, getting nowhere, both feeling misunderstood. Finally, Jessica said, "I think we need to step back from wedding planning for tonight. Let's just take a break." After she left, I sat on my couch feeling the familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. This was supposed to be a happy time. Why was it so hard? What if we couldn't even plan a wedding together without fighting? What did that mean for actually being married? The next day, I had lunch with Ryan. I told him about the fight, about the stress of wedding planning, about the fears underneath. "You know what this sounds like?" Ryan said. "Fear dressed up as wedding planning." "What do you mean?" "You're not really stressed about DJs versus bands. You're stressed about commitment, about the future, about whether you can be the husband Jessica needs. And instead of naming that fear, you're projecting it onto logistical decisions." He was right. The wedding planning was just the surface. Underneath was the same fear that had paralyzed me on the balcony 6 months ago. Fear of the future, fear of inadequacy, fear of failing the people I loved. "So what do I do with that?" I asked. "You do what you've been learning to do. You bring it to God. You talk honestly with Jessica. You remember that while you're fearing the future of your marriage, God is already working on your marriage." That night, I called Jessica. "Can we talk? I want to apologize and explain something." We met at a coffee shop near her apartment. I told her what Ryan had helped me see, that my disengagement wasn't about not caring, but about being scared, that the wedding planning was triggering fears about marriage itself, about my capacity to be a good husband, about disappointing her. "David, I'm scared too," she said. "I'm terrified that I'm not going to be a good wife, that I'll be too controlling, or not flexible enough, that I'll expect too much, or not communicate clearly. Marriage is scary, but that's not a reason not to do it, it's just reality. I know, and I'm sorry for checking out instead of being honest about the fear. Can we try this differently? Can we plan the wedding together, with both of us actually engaged, but also both of us honest when we're feeling overwhelmed?" "Yes, please. That's all I've been wanting." We spent the next 2 hours actually planning, making decisions together, compromising, listening to each other, creating something that reflected both of us rather than just one of us or what we thought we were supposed to do. By the end, we had a clearer vision. A ceremony at Cornerstone Community Church with Pastor James officiating. A reception at a botanical garden that Jessica had fallen in love with. A DJ rather than a band, because it fit our budget better and gave us more control over the music. Simple decorations that focused on candles and flowers rather than elaborate productions. A guest list that included the people who mattered most, not everyone either family wanted to invite. "This feels right," Jessica said. "This feels like us." The next week, the Career Transitions group at church had a new attendee. His name was Michael, probably early 30s, and he had the look of someone who'd been unemployed long enough that the initial shock had worn off and been replaced by despair. During the sharing time, he said, "I lost my job 8 months ago, marketing director at a tech company. Company went under, everyone got laid off. Since then, I've sent out hundreds of resumes. I've had maybe 10 interviews. I've made it to final rounds 3 times and lost out to other candidates each time. I'm running out of savings. My wife is pregnant with our first child, and I'm starting to think God has abandoned me." The room was quiet. I could feel the weight of his words, the exhaustion and hopelessness. "Michael, I don't know why it's taking so long for you," I said. "I can't explain God's timing, but I can tell you that you're not abandoned. God hasn't forgotten you." "How do you know?" "Because it sure feels like he's forgotten." I thought about how to respond. 6 months ago, I was convinced my life was falling apart. I had 60 days to find a new apartment. I thought I was losing my job. My relationship was struggling. And I prayed this desperate prayer, and I felt God tell me, "While you fear the future, I am already solving it." And he was. But the solution took time to unfold, and it didn't look like what I'd expected. What if there is no solution? What if I just stay unemployed and lose everything? Then God will be with you in that too. I know that's not the answer you want, But sometimes faith isn't about getting the outcome we want. It's about trusting God's presence regardless of the outcome. After the meeting, Michael came up to me. "I appreciate what you said, but it's hard to trust when you're watching your bank account drain and your wife is about to have a baby and you feel like a failure." "I know, and I don't want to minimize how hard that is. But can I tell you something? Your worth isn't determined by your employment status. You're not a failure because you lost your job. You're a man dealing with difficult circumstances and showing up to get support. That's not weakness. That's wisdom." Over the next few weeks, Michael kept coming to the group. He started connecting with other members, building friendships, being honest about his struggle. And slowly, I watched the despair start to lift. Not because his situation changed immediately, but because he wasn't carrying it alone anymore. Meanwhile, Jessica and I continued wedding planning, but with a new rhythm. We'd carved out one evening a week specifically for wedding stuff, and we'd agreed that the rest of the time we'd just focus on being engaged, on enjoying this season, on preparing for marriage, rather than just planning a wedding. Pastor James started doing premarital counseling with us. 6 sessions covering everything from communication to finances to conflict resolution to expectations about roles and responsibilities. "The goal of these sessions," he said in our first meeting, "isn't to guarantee you'll never have problems. It's to give you tools for working through problems when they inevitably arise. Marriage doesn't make life easier. It just means you're facing life's difficulties with a partner." One session focused specifically on expectations versus reality. Pastor James had us each write down our expectations for marriage, what we thought it would be like, what we imagined day-to-day life would involve, what roles we'd each play. When we shared our lists, the differences were striking. Jessica expected we'd have dinner together most nights, that we'd maintain date nights even after kids, that we'd be involved in church community together. I'd expected more independence, more time with individual friends, more flexibility around schedules. Neither set of expectations was wrong, but they were different enough that without this conversation, we'd have been set up for disappointment and conflict. "This is why this process matters," Pastor James said. "You're learning to talk about expectations before they become resentments. You're learning to negotiate differences before you're married and living with them daily." In another session, we talked about money. Jessica was a saver, cautious about spending, wanted a detailed budget. I was more of a spender, comfortable with some financial flexibility, thought budgets were restrictive. Again, neither approach was wrong, but without alignment, money would have become a constant source of tension. "Money fights aren't usually about money," Pastor James explained. "They're about values, about control, about security. If you can talk about the deeper issues, what money represents to each of you, what security looks like, how you were raised to think about finances, then you can find ways to work together instead of against each other." Through all these conversations, I was learning that marriage preparation wasn't about making sure everything was perfect before we got married. It was about developing the tools to navigate imperfection together. It was about building a foundation of communication, honesty, and grace that could support us through whatever came. One Sunday after church, my dad called. He and my mum were coming to visit for the weekend, wanted to see the wedding venue, be more involved in the planning. When they arrived, my dad pulled me aside. "Son, I wanted to talk to you about something. Your mom and I want to contribute more to the wedding costs. We know you and Jessica are trying to keep it affordable, but we want to help make sure you can have the day you want." "Dad, that's generous, but Jessica and I are trying to be responsible about this. We don't want to go into debt or spend more than makes sense." "I understand. But David, the heart attack taught me something. Life is short, and I don't want to save money for some future that might not come. I want to invest in the moments that matter. Your wedding matters. Let us help." We compromised. They'd contribute to specific elements that mattered to them. The rehearsal dinner, my mom had specific ideas about flowers without taking over the whole budget. It was another lesson in receiving help gracefully. in letting people love us the way they wanted to love us. 8 months after the balcony moment, Michael from the Career Transitions Group got a job offer. Not his dream job, not what he'd been doing before, but a solid position with decent pay and benefits. At the next meeting, he shared the news with tears in his eyes. "I almost gave up," he said. "I was so close to just stopping the search, convincing myself I'd never work again. But you all kept encouraging me, kept reminding me that God hadn't forgotten me. And you were right. While I was fearing I'd never find work, God was already arranging this opportunity." After he shared, Ryan looked at me and smiled. We both knew what this was. Not just Michael finding a job, but evidence that the words God had spoken to me were true for others too. While we fear the future, He's already solving it. Not always on our timeline, not always in the ways we expect, but always working. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the journey from the balcony to here. The apartment that had seemed like a crisis had led me to God. The job fears had led to a promotion. The uncertainty with Jessica had led to engagement. My dad's heart attack had led to deeper relationship. The Sterling acquisition had led to growth. And now people I was helping were experiencing their own moments of seeing God work in their impossibilities. While you fear the future, I am already solving it. I was learning that those words weren't just for crises, they were for every day, every decision, every uncertainty. God was always working, always arranging, always preparing. My job wasn't to control outcomes, but to trust the process. Jessica and I set our wedding date, April 23rd, 5 months away. We sent out save the dates, booked the venue, started working with caterers and florists and all the other vendors that go into creating one day. But more importantly, we were building a foundation, having hard conversations, learning each other's patterns, practicing forgiveness when we hurt each other, developing rhythms of prayer and support, preparing not just for a wedding, but for a marriage. And through it all, I kept returning to those words from the balcony. They'd become my anchor, my reminder when fear showed up, my confidence when the future felt uncertain. While I feared what marriage would require of me, God was already preparing me for it. While I worried about being a good husband, God was already teaching me what love looked like. While I stressed about wedding details, God was already orchestrating something beautiful. The future would always be unknown, but it would never be unknowable to the one who was already there, already working, already solving. And that made even the scary moments feel sacred. 10 months after the balcony, the wedding was 2 months away, and with each passing day, the reality of marriage felt more tangible and more terrifying. Not because I didn't want to marry Jessica, but because I was starting to understand the weight of what I was promising. Forever, in sickness and health, for better or worse. Those weren't just pretty words. They were binding commitments to an unknown future. The premarital counseling sessions with Pastor James had moved from theoretical to practical. We'd covered communication, finances, conflict resolution. Now we were talking about the hard stuff. What happens when you disappoint each other? When life doesn't go as planned? When the romance of engagement gives way to the reality of daily life? "You're both going to fail each other," Pastor James said in one session, his directness both jarring and refreshing. "You're going to say something hurtful. You're going to make selfish choices. You're going to let each other down. The question isn't whether that will happen, it's what you'll do when it does." Jessica and I looked at each other. We'd talked about this abstractly, but hearing it stated so bluntly made it real. "Grace," Pastor James continued, "that's what makes marriage work. Not compatibility, though that helps. Not never fighting, that's impossible. But the ability to extend grace when your partner fails, and the humility to receive grace when you fail." He had us do an exercise. "I want you each to write down 3 ways you think you might disappoint your spouse. Not hypothetical ways, real, specific ways based on who you actually are." We sat in uncomfortable silence, writing. When we were done, Pastor James had us share what we'd written. I went first. I think I'll withdraw when I'm stressed instead of communicating. I think I'll prioritize work over quality time sometimes, and I think I'll struggle with physical affection when I'm anxious. Jessica nodded, tears in her eyes. Those are real, and I appreciate you naming them. Here's mine. I think I'll be controlling about household stuff and get frustrated when you don't do things my way. I think I'll hold grudges instead of addressing issues immediately. And I think I'll compare our relationship to other couples and make you feel like you're not measuring up. Pastor James let that sit for a moment. Then he said, "Now you know. You're not going into this blind. You've named the dragons you'll have to fight together. And naming them takes away some of their power, because now, when these patterns show up, and they will, you won't be surprised. You'll recognize them, and you can address them." One evening, about 6 weeks before the wedding, Jessica came to my apartment visibly upset. Her mom had called, pushing for last-minute changes to the guest list, the seating chart, the reception timeline. Changes that would stress the budget and compromise the vision Jessica and I had worked so hard to create together. "I don't know how to tell her no without hurting her," Jessica said, tears of frustration streaming down her face. "She's my mom. She's excited. She wants to help. But her help is making everything more complicated. Every time I try to set a boundary, she makes me feel guilty, like I'm being ungrateful or difficult." I pulled her into a hug, let her cry for a moment, then said, "So let's tell her together. Let's call her right now and explain that we appreciate her input, but we need to stick with our plan." "You do that, Jessica. We're a team now. Your struggles are my struggles. We handle hard conversations together. That's what marriage is going to be, facing the hard stuff as partners." We called her mom on speaker. Jessica started nervous, her voice shaking slightly, but as I squeezed her hand for support, she found her strength. "Mom, I love you, and I appreciate everything you want to do for our wedding, but David and I have a specific vision that we've worked really hard to create. We need you to trust that we know what we want, and we need you to support that vision, instead of trying to change it." There was silence on the other end. Then Jessica's mom said, "I didn't realize I was being overbearing. I just want everything to be perfect for you." "I know, but perfect for me isn't the same as what you would choose, and that's okay. We're different people, but this is our wedding, and we need to do it our way." After the call, Jessica looked at me with something like wonder. "That was terrifying. But you did it. We did it. And your mom heard you. That's what matters. That's what marriage is going to be like, isn't it? Not always easy, but not alone." "Yeah, I think so." At work, Sterling Global announced another restructuring, the third since the acquisition. My immediate reaction was panic. Here we go again. More uncertainty, more potential layoffs, more reasons to fear the future. But this time, the news was different. They wanted to expand my team again. 2 more account managers reporting to me, overseeing an even larger portfolio of clients. It was a significant vote of confidence, but it also meant more responsibility, longer hours, and increased pressure during exactly the season when I should be focused on wedding preparation and the transition into married life. Sharon called me into her office to discuss it. "I know the timing isn't ideal with your wedding coming up, but we see real leadership potential in you, David. The way you've built your team, the client relationships you've developed, the mentoring you've done, it's exactly what we need more of." "I'm honored," I said honestly, "but I'm also worried about the timing. I'm getting married in 6 weeks. I need to be present for that, not buried in work." "I appreciate you being direct about that," she said. "And here's what I'm thinking. Yes, to the expanded role, but we structure it so the new reports don't start until after your honeymoon. That gives you time to focus on the wedding and the first few weeks of marriage without the pressure of onboarding new team members." "That would work. Thank you for being flexible." Sharon smiled. "David, the fact that you're setting that boundary is exactly why we want you in this expanded role. Leaders who understand work-life balance make better decisions for their teams. They model healthy priorities. And frankly, we've lost too many good people to burnout because they didn't know how to set boundaries. That conversation taught me something crucial. Boundaries weren't selfishness. They were wisdom, protecting what mattered most. My marriage, my relationship with God, my own well-being didn't make me less effective at work. It made me more effective because I was operating from a place of wholeness rather than depletion. The Career Transitions Group continued to grow beyond what Ryan and I had imagined. We'd added a second weekly meeting to accommodate everyone who wanted to attend. Michael, who'd found work months ago, had started coming back to mentor others who were in the same place he'd been. One Tuesday evening, a woman named Sarah showed up for the first time. She looked shell-shocked, like she was still processing whatever had brought her there. During the sharing time, her voice shook as she spoke. "I don't even know why I'm here," she said. "I got the call this morning. They're restructuring. My position was eliminated after 12 years with the company. 12 years. And just like that, I'm out. I have 2 kids, a mortgage, bills, and I just feel so lost, so scared, so angry." I looked at her and saw myself 10 months ago, standing on a balcony, terrified of the future, convinced I was losing everything. The desperation in her eyes was familiar, visceral. I knew exactly how she felt. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. That's brutal, especially after 12 years. You have every right to be scared and angry. But how do I move forward? How do I job search when I'm this angry? How do I interview when I feel like a failure?" First, you're not a failure. You didn't fail. The company made a business decision that has nothing to do with your worth or capability. Second, you move forward one day at a time. Some days, that just means updating your resume. Other days, it means applying to one job. And some days, it just means getting out of bed and not giving up. That's enough. I shared my story with her, the eviction notice, the job fears, the balcony moment, the words God had spoken. "While you fear the future, I am already solving it." Sarah, I don't know what your specific solution looks like, but I know God hasn't abandoned you. He's already working on your situation in ways you can't see yet. After the meeting, Sarah came up to me with tears streaming down her face. "How do you have so much faith after everything you went through? How do you not panic?" "I do panic sometimes," I admitted. "Even now, with the wedding coming up, I have moments where I'm terrified. But I've learned that panic doesn't prevent problems. It just prevents me from seeing what God's doing. So when fear shows up, and it still does, I try to remember what I've experienced. That God showed up for me when I needed him, and he'll show up for you too. Maybe not on your timeline, maybe not in the way you expect, but he will show up. 3 weeks before the wedding, my dad called with a proposal. He and my mom wanted to host a small dinner party, just immediate family, a chance to celebrate before the craziness of wedding week descended. We gathered at an upscale Italian restaurant, both sets of parents, Jessica and me, creating this new family unit that would be official in 3 weeks. The dinner felt significant in ways I couldn't quite articulate. We were bridging 2 families, 2 histories, 2 sets of expectations and traditions, and we were doing it with grace and intentionality. During dinner, my dad stood up with his wine glass, his eyes already glistening with emotion. "I want to make a toast to David and Jessica. I've watched my son grow so much this past year. A year ago, he was in a dark place, anxious, overwhelmed, convinced his life was falling apart. And instead of running from it, instead of pretending he was fine, he faced it. He got help. He built community. He learned to trust God. And somewhere in that process, he became the kind of man who's ready for marriage. Not perfect. None of us are perfect. But whole, honest, capable of partnership." He paused, collecting himself. "And now he's about to marry a woman who brings out the best in him. Jessica, thank you for loving our son well, for being patient with him during his hardest season, for choosing to build a life with him. We couldn't be more grateful." My mom stood next, her own toast prepared. "David, watching you and Jessica together has restored my faith in young love. You're intentional with each other. You communicate. You support each other's dreams. You've built something beautiful, and we're so proud of both of you. "Jessica, welcome to our family. We're gaining a daughter, and that's a gift." Jessica's parents offered their own toasts, sharing stories from Jessica's childhood, expressing gratitude for how I loved their daughter, welcoming me into their family with open arms. And I sat there, Jessica's hand in mine, overwhelmed by the goodness of it all. 10 months ago, I'd been convinced I was losing everything. Now I was gaining a family, a partnership, a future I couldn't have imagined. The week before the wedding was controlled chaos. Final dress fitting for Jessica, final suit fitting for me, confirming details with vendors who we'd paid deposits to months ago, fielding last-minute questions from out-of-town guests, finalizing the seating chart that had been revised 17 times, rehearsing at the church so everyone knew where to stand and when to walk. Jessica and I barely saw each other between all the obligations and preparations. We'd text throughout the day, quick messages of encouragement and exhaustion, but actual quality time was impossible. The night of the rehearsal dinner, after everyone had left, Jessica and I sat in the empty venue, surrounded by the remnants of dinner, discarded napkins, half-empty wine glasses, plates with crumbs of the dessert we'd barely tasted. We were exhausted, overwhelmed, and oddly peaceful. "Are you ready for this?" Jessica asked, her head resting on my shoulder. "Marriage? Yes. This wedding week? I'll be glad when it's over." She laughed, the kind of tired laugh that comes from too many decisions and not enough sleep. "Same. But David, I want you to know, I'm not scared anymore. About marrying you, about our future, about any of it. Really. Because I'm still terrified sometimes. That's okay. We can take turns being terrified. But I'm not worried anymore about whether we're ready, whether we'll mess it up, whether this is the right decision. I used to worry about all of that, but I'm not worried anymore." "What changed?" "I watched you this year. Really watched you. I watched you go from paralyzed by fear to leading others through their fear. I watched you face your dad's heart attack with strength I didn't know you had. I watched you navigate uncertainty at work without falling apart. I watched you set boundaries, build community, choose faith over control again and again. That's the man I'm marrying. Not someone who never gets scared, but someone who's learning to trust God with the future. And if you can do that, we're going to be okay. While you fear the future, I am already solving it," I said quietly, more to myself than to her. "What?" "That's what God told me. 10 months ago on my balcony, when I was at my lowest point. Those were the words that changed everything. While you fear the future, I am already solving it, and they're still true. While we're nervous about marriage, about what it will require, about whether we can do this, God is already there, already preparing us, already working." She took my hand, interlacing our fingers. "Tomorrow, we're getting married. Tomorrow, we're getting married," I repeated, the reality of it both thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. We sat in silence for a long moment, just being together, letting the weight and the wonder of what we were about to do sink in. "I love you," Jessica said finally. "The real you, the scared, sometimes still learning, imperfect you. That's who I'm choosing tomorrow. I love you too. All of you, even the parts that are going to drive me crazy." She laughed. "Fair enough." We stayed there until the venue staff gently reminded us they needed to close up. We drove home separately, our last night in our respective apartments before becoming a married couple, and I spent most of the night awake, processing everything. The fear was still there. I could feel it, coiled in my chest, ready to offer helpful suggestions about everything that could go wrong. But underneath the fear was something stronger. Confidence. Not in myself, not in Jessica, not in our ability to navigate marriage perfectly, but confidence in the God who'd met me on a balcony, who'd spoken words that had proven true over and over, who'd been preparing this moment long before I knew I needed it. While I'd been fearing the future, he'd been solving it. While I'd been worried about being ready for marriage, he'd been making me ready. While I'd been anxious about forever, he'd been building a foundation that could support forever. The wedding was tomorrow. The future was unknown. But I was learning that unknown didn't mean uncertain, at least not in the way I'd once thought, because the one who held the future had already proven himself faithful, and that was enough to walk into tomorrow with hope instead of fear. That was enough to say yes to forever. The wedding day arrived with perfect spring weather, the kind of day that feels like a gift, like creation itself was celebrating with us. April 23rd. The date we'd circled on our calendars for months, anticipated and feared in equal measure, had finally come. I woke up at 6 in the morning in my apartment, soon to be our apartment, for the last time as a single man. The sun was just beginning to filter through the curtains, casting soft light across the familiar space that would feel different when I returned to it tonight. Different because I'd be returning as a husband, as half of a married couple, as someone who'd made permanent promises in front of everyone we loved. My groomsmen, Jake, Ryan, and my cousin Matt, showed up at 7 with coffee and bagels, their assigned job to keep me calm, fed, and on schedule. They'd taken their responsibilities seriously, arriving with enough coffee to caffeinate a small army. "How'd you sleep?" Jake asked as we sat around my small kitchen table, the same table where I'd read the eviction notice almost a year ago. "Barely. Maybe 3 hours. I kept thinking about everything. The vows, the ceremony, what it means to be married, whether I'm actually ready for this." "That's normal," Ryan said, the voice of experience since he'd been married for 4 years. "I didn't sleep the night before my wedding either. But David, that nervousness, it's not a bad sign. It means you understand the weight of what you're promising. The guys who aren't nervous are the ones who haven't thought it through. You're going to do great," Matt added, "and Jessica is perfect for you. Everyone can see it." We ate breakfast, joked around, tried to keep things light. But underneath the casual banter, I could feel the significance of the day pressing in. In 8 hours, my life would be fundamentally different. In 8 hours, I'd be married. At 10, we headed to Cornerstone Community Church. The space was being transformed by the wedding coordinator and her team. Flowers everywhere, white chairs arranged in neat rows, candles waiting to be lit. The botanical garden aesthetic Jessica had envisioned coming to life. It was beautiful in a way that made my chest tight. I retreated to one of the church's side rooms with my groomsmen to get ready. The suit I'd chosen months ago hung on the door. Navy blue, fitted, the kind of thing I never would have picked for myself, but Jessica had insisted made me look confident and handsome. I trusted her judgment more than my own when it came to this stuff. As I was adjusting my tie for the 3rd time, trying to get it perfect, Pastor James knocked and came in. "Big day," he said with a warm smile. "How's your heart?" I took a breath, considering the question seriously. "Honestly, I keep thinking about that night on my balcony, almost a year ago, when I was convinced my life was falling apart, when I couldn't see any way forward, and God spoke to me. 'While you fear the future, I am already solving it.' And now I'm here, about to marry the woman I love, surrounded by people who've become family. It's surreal, like I can see the whole journey from fear to this moment, and it makes me trust that God knows what He's doing." "He does," Pastor James said. "And David, I want you to know something. The work God has done in you this past year, that's not just preparation for your wedding day. It's preparation for your marriage. The faith you've built, the community you've developed, the vulnerability you've learned. Those are the things that will sustain you when marriage gets hard, because it will get hard. But you won't face the hard things the way you would have faced them a year ago. What if I mess it up? What if I fail Jessica? You will mess up, you will fail her, and she'll fail you, that's guaranteed. But failure isn't the end of a marriage. It's an opportunity to practice grace, to choose each other again, to grow. The question isn't whether you'll fail, it's whether you'll keep showing up, keep being honest, keep choosing love even when it's hard." We prayed together, Pastor James, my groomsman, and me, not a formal scripted prayer. Just honest conversation with God about the day, about the marriage we were beginning, about the future that was still unknown, but no longer felt terrifying. At 2 o'clock, the ceremony began. I stood at the front of the church with Pastor James, Ryan beside me as my best man, watching guests file in. My parents sitting in the front row, my mom already crying. Jessica's family, her dad looking proud and emotional. Sharon from work, sitting with several colleagues. Elena, Tasha, Kevin, and the rest of the young adults group scattered throughout the room. Members of the career transitions group, including Michael and Sarah, who'd both found their way through their own wilderness seasons. The church was full, not huge, maybe 150 people, but every seat mattered. These were the people who'd walked with us, supported us, prayed for us, celebrated with us. And then the music changed. The doors at the back opened, and Jessica appeared. I'd seen her in various stages of preparation. We'd done a couple's photo shoot. We'd practiced our first dance. I'd watched her try on dresses at her final fitting. But nothing prepared me for seeing her in this moment, walking toward me, choosing me, committing her life to mine. She was stunning. The dress was simple but elegant, classic without being traditional. Her hair was down with small flowers woven through it. But more than the physical details, there was something in her expression, a mixture of joy and solemnity, excitement and reverence. She understood the weight of what we were doing, and she was choosing it anyway. Her dad walked her down the aisle, and I watched them come closer. When they reached the front, he placed her hand in mine and whispered, "Take care of her." "I will," I promised, my voice barely above a whisper. Pastor James smiled at us, then at the congregation. "We're gathered here today to witness David and Jessica making covenant with each other before God and this community. Marriage is not entered into lightly, but thoughtfully, prayerfully, with a recognition that this is a sacred promise. David and Jessica have chosen to write their own vows, to speak from their hearts about what they're promising to each other." He nodded to me to go first. I'd written and rewritten these vows dozens of times, trying to capture everything I wanted to say, everything I wanted to promise. In the end, I'd kept them simple, honest, real. I took both of Jessica's hands in mine, looked into her eyes, and began. "Jessica, almost a year ago, I was standing on my apartment balcony at 2 in the morning, convinced my life was falling apart. I was terrified of the future, paralyzed by fear of everything I couldn't control. And in that moment of desperation, I prayed, and God spoke to me. He told me, 'While you fear the future, I am already solving it. And you were part of that solution. You've taught me what it means to trust, to be vulnerable, to face fear without running from it. You've loved me at my worst and believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself.'" I paused, collecting myself, feeling tears threatening. "Today, I'm still scared. Scared of letting you down, of not being the husband you deserve, of failing at this most important thing. But I'm not letting that fear stop me anymore. I'm choosing to trust that the God who brought us together will sustain us through whatever comes. I promise to love you, to be honest with you, to face our future together with you. I promise to grow with you, to support your dreams, to be your partner in all things. I promise to remember, especially on the hard days, that while we fear what's ahead, God is already there, already working, already preparing the way. I choose you, Jessica, today and every day for the rest of my life." Jessica was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. She squeezed my hands, took a breath, and spoke her own vows. "David, when we first started dating, you tried so hard to be impressive, to seem like you had everything together, to convince me you were worth choosing. And for a while I believed that version of you, but this year I watched that version fall away and the real you emerge. The you that gets scared sometimes, the you that doesn't have all the answers, the you that needs help and isn't afraid to ask for it anymore. And that's the you I fell in love with, not the polished, perfect version, but the real, honest, learning to trust God version." She smiled through her tears. "I promise to love all of you, the confident parts and the scared parts, the strong moments and the vulnerable moments. I promise to be your partner, not your project, to build a life with you, not fix you. I promise to remind you when fear shows up that God is already working, and I promise to let you remind me of the same thing when I forget. I choose you, David. I choose us. I choose this adventure of building a life together, trusting that the one who brought us this far will carry us the rest of the way. Pastor James led us through the traditional exchange, the rings, the formal vows, the legal parts of the ceremony. But those felt almost secondary to what we'd already said, to the promises we'd made from our hearts. When Pastor James finally pronounced us married and invited me to kiss my bride, the church erupted in applause. I pulled Jessica close and kissed her, my wife, for the first time as her husband. The kiss lasted longer than we'd planned, both of us lost in the moment, in the reality that we'd done it. We'd actually done it. We walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, no longer two individuals but a partnership, a covenant, a new family unit. The receiving line was a blur of hugs and congratulations and tearful relatives. But through it all, Jessica's hand stayed in mine, anchoring me, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this. The reception at the Botanical Garden was everything we'd hoped for. The space was magical. String lights overhead, flowers everywhere, tables arranged around a small dance floor, the evening light filtering through trees. It felt intimate, despite having 150 people, like we'd created a small world just for this celebration. Dinner was served, toasts were given. My dad's speech talked about second chances and not taking time for granted, about watching me grow from a scared young man to someone ready for partnership. Jessica's mum shared stories from Jessica's childhood, welcomed me into their family with genuine warmth. Ryan gave a toast about community and faith and watching God work in impossible situations. But the toast that meant the most came from an unexpected source. Michael from the Career Transitions Group stood up without being on the planned list of speakers. "I know I'm not officially supposed to speak," he said, "but David and Jessica, I have to say something. David, a year ago you were going through your own crisis. And then when you came out on the other side, you didn't just move on with your life. You turned around and helped people like me who were where you'd been. You shared your story. You gave hope. You reminded us that while we feared the future, God was already solving it. And your willingness to be vulnerable, to lead from your wounds instead of your victories, changed my life. So thank you. Thank you for showing us that our struggles can have purpose. Thank you for demonstrating that faith isn't about having it all together. It's about trusting God even when you don't." The room was silent, except for the sound of people crying. Jessica squeezed my hand under the table, her eyes saying what words couldn't. "This is why we went through what we went through. This is the redemption of pain." We cut the cake, a simple but elegant three-tiered creation that Jessica had agonized over choosing. We had our first dance to a song we'd picked months ago, but that felt prophetic now. "I'll Stand By You" by the Pretenders. Jessica had her dance with her dad. I danced with my mom, who whispered in my ear, "I'm so proud of the man you've become." As the evening wore on, as the music played and people danced and celebrated, Jessica and I found a quiet moment outside the reception tent. We stood in the garden, just the two of us, looking at the celebration through the windows. "We did it," Jessica said. "We did. How do you feel?" "Married," she laughed. "I feel married, like something shifted the moment we said those vows. We're different now. I feel it too. Legally, we could have gotten married at any point in the last few months, but doing it this way, with everyone watching, with all those promises said out loud, it made it real in a different way." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Jessica said, "Tell me again what God told you on the balcony. While you fear the future, I am already solving it." And he was. He brought us together. He helped us grow. He prepared us for this. And he'll keep working, won't he, in our marriage, in whatever comes next? Yeah, he will. We returned to the reception, danced more, talked with guests, soaked in the celebration. Around 10, we made our exit. A send-off with sparklers and cheering and rice being thrown. We climbed into the car that would take us to the hotel, where we'd spend our wedding night before flying out to our honeymoon the next morning. As we drove away, looking back at the botanical garden lit up with lights and full of people celebrating, Jessica said, "That was perfect." It was. Not perfect in a flawless way, but perfect in a "this is exactly what it was supposed to be" way. Do you remember a year ago, when you got that eviction notice? How could I forget? Did you ever imagine in that moment that a year later you'd be here, married, with a promotion, with a community, with all of this? No, I couldn't have imagined any of this. That's what makes it so clear that God was working, because this isn't a story I could have written for myself. We checked into the hotel, exhausted and exhilarated, and as I fell asleep next to my wife, I felt profound gratitude, not just for the wedding day, but for the journey that had led to it. From the balcony to the altar, from fear to faith, from isolation to community, from thinking I was losing everything to gaining more than I'd known to ask for. While I'd been fearing the future, God had been solving it, not by removing every challenge, but by preparing me to face challenges differently, not by making life perfect, but by making me capable of finding Him in the imperfect, not by answering every question, but by proving that His presence was answer enough. The future was still unknown. Marriage would bring new challenges, new fears, new opportunities to choose trust over control. But I wasn't facing any of it the way I would have faced it a year ago, because now I knew, while I worried about tomorrow, God was already there, already working, already solving, already preparing me for whatever came next, and that changed everything. 1 year. 365 days since that night on the balcony when my life had felt like it was ending and God had spoken words that would reshape everything. While you fear the future, I am already solving it. Jessica and I were 6 months into marriage, and we'd settled into rhythms that felt both comfortable and challenging in the ways that growth requires. We'd learned that living together meant navigating different communication styles, different approaches to household chores, different ideas about how to spend weekends. None of it was bad, just different from the independence we'd both known. Jessica's graphic design business was thriving beyond what either of us had expected. She'd built a client base that kept her consistently busy, created a portfolio that attracted exactly the kind of projects she wanted, and was making more money than she had at her previous corporate job. Watching her confidence grow as she built something of her own filled me with pride. Work continued its upward trajectory. The expanded team was functioning well, our client relationships were strong, and Sterling Global kept finding new ways to invest in our division. I'd recently been asked to present at a company-wide leadership conference about team development and employee retention. The promotion that had seemed so terrifying a year ago now felt natural. But growth isn't linear, and just when you think you've mastered one level of faith, life has a way of testing you at a deeper one. It started on a Tuesday evening in early October. Jessica and I were making dinner together, one of our weekly rituals, this tradition of cooking side by side, talking about our days, staying connected in the midst of busy schedules. I was chopping vegetables for a stir-fry while she prepared the sauce. And then she set down the whisk and said, "I need to talk to you about something." The tone of her voice made my stomach drop. That particular combination of serious and nervous that meant whatever came next was significant. "Okay. What's going on?" "I'm late." I kept chopping, not quite processing. "Late for what?" "David." She turned to face me fully. "I'm late. My period. I'm 2 weeks late." The knife stopped mid-motion. The world tilted slightly on its axis. We talked about kids, of course, many times, someday, in the future, when we were more established, more prepared, more ready. Not 6 months into marriage, not when Jessica's business was just taking off, not when we were still figuring out how to be married. Not now. "Have you taken a test?" "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. I wanted us to process this together before we knew for sure." "David, I can see your face. You're panicking." "I'm not panicking. I'm just processing. This wasn't the plan." She crossed her arms. A gesture I'd learned meant she was feeling defensive. Plans change. Life happens. But I need to know, if I'm pregnant, are you going to be okay? Are we going to be okay? I set down the knife, turned to fully face her, forced myself to take a breath before responding. Yes, we're going to be okay. I'm scared, but we're going to be okay. You're sure? Because I need to know you're in this with me. I can't do this feeling like I'm dragging you along. Jessica, I'm in this. I'm terrified, but I'm in this. We're a team. Whatever this is, we face it together. The next morning, Jessica took a pregnancy test. We stood in the bathroom together, watching those 3 minutes tick by on the timer on my phone. 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours, 3 minutes of holding hands and barely breathing and trying not to catastrophize about what a positive result would mean. The timer went off. We looked at the test lying on the counter. 2 pink lines. Positive. We sat on the bathroom floor, Jessica holding the test, both of us just staring at it like if we looked long enough, the result might change. Our family of 2 was becoming 3. In approximately 8 months, we'd be parents. Ready or not, and we definitely felt not, this was happening. While you fear the future, I am already solving it. The words came back to me, but this time they felt different. This wasn't about a job or an apartment or even a wedding. This was about a human life, a child, the responsibility of raising another person. The stakes felt infinitely, terrifyingly higher. We made an appointment with Jessica's doctor for that afternoon. The doctor confirmed the pregnancy, ordered blood work, gave us an estimated due date, June 15th, 6 months away, half a year to prepare for something we'd never done before, something that would change our lives permanently. We sat in the car in the parking lot after the appointment, neither of us quite ready to drive away, to return to normal life when nothing felt normal anymore. I don't know how to feel, Jessica said quietly. I'm scared, but I'm also excited. Is that wrong? Should I just be scared? I think we can be both, scared and excited, overwhelmed and grateful, all of it at once. Are you excited at all, or just scared? I thought about it honestly. I'm scared that I won't be a good dad, that I'll mess this kid up somehow, that I won't know what I'm doing. But yeah, I'm also excited. Somewhere under the fear, there's this sense of wonder, that we're creating a life together, that we're going to have a child. We told our families that evening. Both sets of parents were ecstatic in a way that made our own anxiety feel almost wrong. Weren't we supposed to be thrilled, celebrating? Instead, we were mostly trying not to hyperventilate. My mum cried happy tears. I'm going to be a grandmother. Oh, David, this is wonderful. How are you feeling? Terrified, honestly. That's normal. Your father and I were terrified when we found out we were pregnant with you, but it was the best thing that ever happened to us. Jessica's dad, ever practical, asked about finances. Are you in a good place to handle the expenses? Kids aren't cheap. We'll figure it out, I said, with more confidence than I felt. That Sunday, I shared the news at the young adults group. We'd become regulars, integrated into the community, comfortable being vulnerable with this group of people who'd walked with us through so much. Jessica's pregnant, I said during the sharing time. We're having a baby in June, and I'm scared out of my mind. Elena smiled knowingly. Welcome to parenthood. The fear starts early and never really ends. But that's not a bad thing. The fear means you understand the weight of what you're taking on. How do you do it? I asked her. She had 2 kids, ages 3 and 5, and always seemed so put together. How do you parent when you're not sure you're ready? You remember that you're not doing it alone. You have Jessica, you have community, you have God, and you learn as you go. Nobody's actually ready for their first kid. You just show up and figure it out one diaper at a time. And David, God's been preparing you for this. This whole year, the lessons about trust, about facing fear, about depending on Him, all of that was preparation for parenthood too. Over the next few weeks, as the reality of impending parenthood settled in, I watched Jessica transform. The initial shock gave way to a kind of fierce determination. She started researching everything, prenatal vitamins, birthing methods, nursery designs, baby gear, parenting philosophies, sleep training approaches. Her design business adjusted to accommodate the upcoming maternity leave, and she started planning how she'd work from home once the baby arrived. I, on the other hand, struggled. The fear kept showing up in different forms, shape-shifting to fit whatever scenario my brain wanted to catastrophize about that day. What if something goes wrong with the pregnancy? What if we can't afford everything a baby needs? What if I'm a terrible father? What if our marriage suffers under the stress of parenting? What if I lose my job and can't provide for my family? What if the baby has health problems? What if we're making a huge mistake thinking we can do this? One evening, about 2 months into the pregnancy, Jessica found me on our apartment balcony. The same balcony where I'd stood a year ago, terrified about the eviction notice. History repeating itself, but with different fears. "You've been out here for an hour," she said, standing next to me. "Talk to me." I'm spiraling. I'm doing that thing where I imagine every possible disaster and convince myself it's all going to fall apart. What specifically are you worried about? Everything. Money, being a good father, whether we're ready, whether our marriage can handle this, whether I can handle this. What if I'm not cut out for parenting? What if I mess up this kid the way my dad messed me up with all his expectations and pressure? Jessica took my hand. "David, do you remember what God told you? Right here, on this balcony. While you fear the future, I am already solving it." Exactly. That was true for the apartment. It was true for your job. It was true for our relationship, for the wedding, for everything this year. Why wouldn't it be true for this baby too? Because this feels bigger, more permanent, higher stakes. It is bigger. It is higher stakes. But that doesn't mean God's not already working on it. That doesn't mean He's not already preparing you to be a father, preparing us to be parents, preparing this baby for the family they're being born into. I pulled her close, rested my chin on her head. "How are you so calm about this?" "I'm not calm. I'm terrified too, but I'm choosing to trust anyway. And I need you to choose that too, because I can't carry both my fear and yours. We have to take turns being the strong one." The career transitions group continued to grow, and now we had people who'd graduated from it coming back as mentors. Michael was leading his own session on networking strategies. Sarah was helping others with resume reviews. The community had become self-sustaining in a way that felt like watching something we'd planted grow beyond what we'd imagined. One Tuesday evening, a man named Robert showed up for the first time. He was probably in his late 50s, looked exhausted and defeated in the way people do when they've been job searching for too long. During the sharing time, he said, "I've been out of work for 11 months. I've applied to over 400 jobs. I've had maybe 20 interviews. I keep making it to final rounds and losing out to younger candidates. I'm 57 years old. And I'm starting to think I'm never going to work again. My savings are gone. I might lose my house. And honestly, I don't know why I'm here. I don't think anything can help at this point." The room was silent. Everyone could feel the weight of his despair. I looked at him and saw myself on that balcony. Different circumstances, but the same fear. The same sense that the future was a threat instead of a possibility. "Robert, I'm not going to tell you it's going to be easy. I'm not going to pretend I know how your story ends. But I can tell you that you're not alone. And I can tell you what I've learned this year about facing fear of the future." I shared my story, the whole thing. The eviction notice, the job insecurity, the relationship struggles, the balcony moment, the words God had spoken. And then I shared about the pregnancy, about being 6 months into marriage and facing unexpected parenthood, about how fear kept showing up in new forms. "The thing I've learned," I said, "is that fear isn't the enemy. It's a signal that we're facing something significant. And the question isn't how to eliminate the fear, it's what we do with it. Do we let it paralyze us? Or do we acknowledge it and move forward anyway, trusting that we're not navigating the future alone?" After the meeting, Robert came up to me. "That thing God told you, about solving the future while you fear it, do you really believe that's true for everyone, or just for you?" I believe it's true for everyone who's willing to trust him. I can't guarantee your specific outcome. I don't know if you'll find work next week or next year. But I know God hasn't abandoned you. And I know that while you're fearing what comes next, he's already there, already working. I hope you're right, because I'm out of other options. Sometimes that's exactly where we need to be, out of our own options. That's when we finally make room for God's options. As Jessica's pregnancy progressed, I watched her body change, watched her navigate morning sickness and fatigue and all the physical challenges of growing a human. And I marveled at her strength, her resilience, her ability to keep building her business and planning for the baby and being patient with my ongoing anxiety. We started preparing the nursery, painting walls a soft yellow-grey that Jessica had chosen, assembling furniture that came in impossible to decipher instruction manuals, washing tiny clothes that seemed impossibly small for an actual human. Each step made it more real. At our 20-week ultrasound, we found out we were having a son. A boy, our son. The technician showed us images of his profile, his tiny hands, his heart beating. And suddenly, he wasn't just an abstract concept. He was a person, a specific human we'd meet in a few months, our child. "We need to name him," Jessica said as we drove home from the appointment. "Any ideas?" "Actually, yeah. I've been thinking about it. What about Samuel? It means God has heard, or heard by God. Because this whole journey, from your balcony prayer to now, it's been about God hearing us, right? About him answering in ways we didn't expect, but needed. "Samuel," I said, trying it out. "Samuel Chen. I love it." That night I stood on the balcony again, not because I was spiraling, but because I wanted to mark the moment. 1 year ago I'd stood here, desperate and terrified, and God had met me, had spoken words that had proven true over and over. Now I was standing here as a married man, about to become a father, facing a future that was still uncertain, but no longer felt threatening, because I'd learned that while I feared what was coming, God was already there. Jessica joined me, her hand resting on her growing belly. "What are you thinking about?" "About how much has changed in a year, about how God's been faithful through all of it, about how I'm still scared, but differently now." "Differently how?" "I'm scared of being a father, but I'm not scared that God won't show up. I know he will. I've seen him do it too many times to doubt it now." She leaned against me. "Samuel's lucky. He's going to have a father who knows how to face fear with faith." "I hope so. I really hope so." As we stood there together, feeling the baby move inside Jessica's belly, I thought about the journey that had led to this moment. Every fear I'd faced had been an opportunity to learn trust. Every uncertainty had been a chance to see God work. Every impossible situation had revealed his faithfulness, and now we were facing the biggest unknown yet, parenthood. But we weren't facing it the way I would have faced it a year ago. Because now I knew, while I feared the future, God was already solving it. While I worried about being a good father, he was already preparing me. While I stressed about the unknown, he was already there. And that made all the difference. June 15th, the due date. 18 months since that night on the balcony when everything had changed. Samuel David Chen arrived at 3:47 in the morning after 16 hours of labor. 6 pounds, 9 ounces, 19 inches long, perfect in every way that mattered. And the moment they placed him in my arms, everything I'd been afraid of evaporated, replaced by a love so fierce and immediate it took my breath away. I stood in the hospital room, Jessica exhausted but radiant in the bed, holding our son, and felt the weight of 1.5 years of God's faithfulness crystallize in this tiny human. This was what God had been preparing me for, not just the apartment, not just the job, not just the marriage. All of it had been building to this moment. "He's here," Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. "Samuel's actually here. He's perfect. You're perfect. I can't believe we made an entire human." The first few weeks of parenthood were exactly as hard as everyone had warned us they'd be, but also more beautiful than I'd imagined. The sleep deprivation was real. I functioned on maybe 3 hours a night, broken into 45-minute chunks. The constant feeding, diaper changing, soothing, wondering if we were doing anything right. It was overwhelming, but it was also sacred. Holding Samuel at 3 in the morning, watching him sleep in my arms, feeling his tiny hand wrap around my finger. These moments felt like prayers, like worship, like encountering something holy in the most ordinary circumstances. Jessica was incredible, strong and intuitive and patient in ways I'd never seen before. She navigated breastfeeding challenges, helped me learn to swaddle properly, gently corrected my mistakes without making me feel like a failure. We were learning together, figuring out this parenting thing one day at a time. My parents visited when Samuel was 2 weeks old. My dad held him with a gentleness I'd rarely seen, tears in his eyes. "This is what it's all about," he said quietly. "This is what matters, not the career, not the accomplishments. This, family, love, legacy." "I'm terrified I'm going to mess him up," I admitted. "You will mess him up sometimes. All parents do. But you know what makes a good father? Not perfection. Showing up, being present, loving them even when you're tired and overwhelmed and have no idea what you're doing. And David, you're already doing that." When Samuel was a month old, I went back to work. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Leaving him and Jessica, returning to the office, trying to focus on client needs and team management when all I wanted was to be home with my family. But work had been flexible. Sterling Global offered generous paternity leave, 6 weeks paid, and Sharon made it clear that my priority should be my family. When I did return, she'd adjusted my schedule so I could work from home 2 days a week. "We want you here for the long term," she said, "and that means supporting your whole life, not just extracting productivity from you." The Career Transitions group had continued without me during my leave, Ryan and Elena taking over leadership. When I returned for the first session after Samuel's birth, bringing him with me since Jessica had a client call, the group celebrated with me. "This is Samuel," I said, holding him up, "and he's the latest proof that while we fear the future, God is already solving it. 18 months ago, I was convinced I was losing everything. Now I have everything I didn't know to ask for." Robert, the man who'd been out of work for 11 months, came up to me after. "I got a job," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "After all this time, it's not exactly what I was looking for, but it's good work, good pay, and they value my experience. I wanted to thank you for not giving up on me, for reminding me that God was working even when I couldn't see it. That's incredible, Robert. I'm so happy for you. And I want you to know, I'm staying with the group, not as someone who needs help, but as someone who can help others. Because that's what you've taught us, that our struggles have purpose, that we can turn around and help people who are where we were. As summer turned to fall, we settled into new rhythms. Jessica had figured out how to balance motherhood and her design business, taking on projects that could accommodate Samuel's schedule. I'd learned to function on less sleep than I'd thought possible, to find joy in the small moments, to ask for help when I needed it. One evening in September, when Samuel was 3 months old, Jessica and I managed to get him down to sleep early and actually had time to talk, something that had become rare in the chaos of new parenthood. "Do you remember being scared about becoming parents?" Jessica asked, curled up next to me on the couch. "I'm still scared sometimes," I admitted. "Every time he cries and I can't figure out why. Every time I think about all the ways I could fail him. Every time I realize how much responsibility we have for this tiny human. But it's different from before, right? The fear is still there, but it doesn't control you the way it used to." "Yeah. I think I've learned that fear and faith can coexist, that being scared doesn't mean I'm doing it wrong. It just means I understand what's at stake." "I'm proud of you," Jessica said, "the way you've shown up as a father, the way you help without having to be asked, the way you're not afraid to admit when you don't know something. Samuel's lucky to have you." In October, the church asked me to share my story again, this time at a Sunday service, not just at a midweek gathering. Pastor James thought it would be meaningful for the whole congregation to hear about God's faithfulness in my life. I agreed, but with one condition. I wanted to share from the balcony, the actual balcony where it had all started. So they set up cameras and a small audio system, and I stood on my apartment balcony, the same spot where I'd been desperate and terrified 18 months ago, and told my story to the church via video. 18 months ago, I stood right here, convinced my life was falling apart. I'd gotten an eviction notice. I thought I was losing my job. My relationship was struggling, and in my desperation, I prayed. Not a polished religious prayer, just desperate honesty. And God met me here. He spoke words that would change everything. While you fear the future, I'm already solving it. I showed them around the apartment, now filled with baby gear and family photos and evidence of the life God had built. I introduced them to Jessica and Samuel. I shared about the job that had seemed threatened but became a promotion, the apartment crisis that had resolved in perfect timing, the relationship that had become a marriage, the unexpected pregnancy that had become our son. I'm telling you this because I know I'm not the only one who's afraid of the future. I know there are people watching this who are facing their own impossibilities, who are convinced things are falling apart, who can't see any way forward. And I want you to know you're not alone. God hasn't abandoned you. And while you're fearing what comes next, He's already there, already working, already solving. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people reached out. Some I knew, many I didn't. Each one sharing their own fears, their own struggles, their own need for hope that the future wasn't something to dread, but something God was already preparing. One message came from a young woman named Emily, probably early 20s. I'm exactly where you were 18 months ago. Lost my apartment, about to lose my job, convinced my life is over. Your story gave me hope that maybe God hasn't forgotten me. Maybe He's already working on my situation too. I called her, connected her with the Career Transitions group, introduced her to Elena from the Young Adults group, and I watched as the community that had helped me began helping her. The cycle continuing, the faithfulness multiplying. In November, Jessica and I celebrated our first anniversary. We couldn't do anything elaborate. Samuel was only 5 months old, and leaving him with a babysitter for more than a couple hours still felt impossible. So we ordered takeout, put Samuel to bed early, and just talked. "Do you remember our first date?" Jessica asked. "Of course. I was so nervous I could barely eat." "I knew you were nervous. That's part of why I liked you. You weren't trying to be smooth or impressive. You were just you. A year ago, we were standing at an altar, making promises we only partially understood. And now look at us, parents, homeowners, well, renters, but still, a family. Oh, do you ever miss the simplicity of before? Before marriage, before the baby, when it was just you dealing with your own stuff?" I thought about it honestly. Sometimes I miss the freedom, the ability to sleep whenever I wanted, to make decisions that only affected me, to not worry about anyone else. But I wouldn't trade this. What we have now, it's harder, but it's better. It's richer. It means more. "While you fear the future, I am already solving it," Jessica said. That's become our family motto, hasn't it? Yeah, because it keeps being true. It was true for the apartment, true for the job, true for our relationship, true for Samuel, and it'll be true for whatever comes next. What do you think comes next? I have no idea, and I'm okay with that. For the first time in my life, I'm okay with not knowing what the future holds, because I know who holds the future. ETD. As December arrived, bringing with it the holiday season and Samuel's first Christmas, I found myself reflecting on the journey. 18 months. Not a long time in the scope of a lifetime, but enough time to prove that transformation was real, that God was faithful, that fear didn't have to have the final word. I'd gone from unable to enter a grocery store to leading a ministry for others facing uncertainty, from terrified of commitment to married and a father, from controlled by anxiety to learning to trust, from isolated to embedded in community, from convinced God had forgotten me to witnessing his faithfulness over and over. On Christmas Eve, we attended the candlelight service at Cornerstone. Samuel slept through most of it, nestled in a carrier against my chest. During the final song, Silent Night, sung with just candlelight and voices, I held my son close and felt tears streaming down my face. This was it. This was what mattered. Not the career success, not the apartment, not the achievements. This, family, community, faith, love, the knowledge that we weren't navigating life alone. After the service, Pastor James found us in the lobby. David, I wanted to tell you something. Do you remember when you first came to this church? You were so nervous, so anxious, so unsure. And now look at you, father, husband, leader, someone whose story is giving hope to dozens of people. That's the work of God in a life. I couldn't have imagined any of this 18 months ago, I admitted. That's the point. God's solutions are always bigger than our imaginations. His plans are always more redemptive than our fears. You just had to be willing to trust. That night, after we'd put Samuel to bed, after we'd opened our modest gifts to each other, after we'd turned off the Christmas tree lights, Jessica and I stood on the balcony one more time. Should we make this a tradition? Jessica asked. Coming out here on Christmas Eve, remembering where we started. I'd like that. A reminder that God meets us in our desperation, that he speaks when we're willing to listen, that he's faithful even when, especially when, we can't see the way forward. We stood in silence, looking at the city lights, thinking about everything that had changed and everything that remained constant. The circumstances had transformed completely, but God's character hadn't. He was still faithful, still present, still working. While you fear the future, I am already solving it. Those words had proven true in ways I couldn't have imagined when I first heard them. Not just in the practical problems being resolved, but in the deeper work, the transformation of my heart, my faith, my ability to trust. I thought about everyone who'd been part of the journey. My parents who'd walked with me through my dad's heart attack and my own struggles. Jessica, who'd loved me at my worst and believed in my best. Pastor James, Ryan, Elena, and the church community who'd welcomed me and taught me what authentic faith looked like. Michael, Sarah, Robert, and all the others from the career transitions group who'd let me walk with them through their fears. Sharon and my team at work, who'd supported my growth as a leader, and Samuel, who'd taught me in just 6 months that love could be both terrifying and transformative. Each one had been part of how God was solving my future. Each relationship had been part of the solution I couldn't have engineered on my own. What do you want for Samuel? Jessica asked suddenly. I want him to know he's loved. I want him to know that fear is normal, but faith is possible. I want him to learn what I'm still learning, that while we fear the future, God is already there. I want him to have a relationship with God that's real and honest, not just religious performance. And I want him to know that his father loved him enough to face his own fears so he could be the dad Samuel needs. He'll know. He's already seeing it. The way you show up for him, for us, for the people in our community, that's the legacy you're building. As we went back inside, I took one last look at the balcony. This space that had been the site of my greatest desperation had become holy ground. A place where God had met me, spoken to me, redirected my entire life. My name is David, and 18 months ago I stood on this balcony convinced my life was ending. But it wasn't ending, it was beginning. I'm telling you this story because I know I'm not the only one who's been paralyzed by fear of the future, who's been convinced that everything is falling apart, who can't see any way forward. And I want you to know, while you fear the future, God is already solving it. Not always on your timeline, not always in the ways you choose, but always in ways that are redemptive, purposeful, faithful. The challenges won't disappear, the fear won't vanish completely, but you'll learn what I'm still learning, that faith isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to trust despite the fear. So if you're standing on your own balcony tonight, desperate and overwhelmed and convinced your life is falling apart, pray, Be honest, ask for help, and then trust that while you're fearing what comes next, God is already there, already working, already solving, already preparing you for a future better than anything you can imagine, because that's who He is, that's what He does, and He'll do it for you too, just like He did for me.